Through you, Madam Chair, the meeting is live.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of Finance and Corporate Services. The City of Kitchener has aligned with provincial changes to COVID-19 restrictions, and City Hall is now open for in-person services, but appointments are still being encouraged. The City remains committed to safety of our patrons and staff and continue to facilitate electronic meetings participation for members of the public. Those people interested in participating in future meetings can register to participate electronically by completing the online delegation registration form at kitchener.ca/delegation or via email at delegation@kitchener.ca. For those who are interested in accessing the meeting live stream video, it is available at kitchener.ca/watch now. With that, we'll start with our first item, which is a consent item. Do I have a mover for the consent item? Moved by Councillor Schneider. Are there any questions with regard to the interim nominating committee period extension? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. We'll now move on to our discussion items, and our first item is the Queen Victoria statue, consideration for next steps. And Alan, our interim director of equity, anti-racism, and Indigenous initiatives, will provide us with a 5-minute presentation.
Thank you very much, Councillor Galloway-Seelock. So we'll just wait for the slides to come up. Okay, so I'll just do a quick overview of the staff report that is focused on consideration for next steps for the Queen Victoria statue. So next slide, please. All right, so a bit of background. So the Queen Victoria statue has been in the park since 1911. It was commissioned and put up by the Imperial Order of the Daughters of the Empire and officially dedicated in 1911. And the purpose of the order was to promote British loyalism and imperialism at this time. And so a lot has changed, obviously, in our society since then. And there has been recently, over the past year, there's been social activism and public criticism that have come up around the statue. And so there was interpretive signage installed in 2021 in September, just ahead of National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. And the purpose of installing the signage was to signal to the community that work was underway towards equity and reconciliation in the realm of public art. And so this is a larger body of work that the city has been involved in through collaboration with the Reconciliation Action Plan Working Group at the region, which is a subcommittee that is examining the narratives and stories that shape our current public spaces and commit to making changes on how we commemorate harmful legacies. So the staff have been collaborating around this work for quite some time now, the past year and a half, with this working group. But clearly there's a need to address this particular statue at the moment due to the amount of, the narratives that are happening within the community. And so we're bringing this report forward to present a strategy for next steps with the statue. So next slide, please. So this is the proposed engagement and education strategy that we're putting forward. So staff have researched strategies related to next steps through many different things. So we've done consultation with city staff, review of relevant corporate and municipal policies, review of processes and actions being taken by other municipalities, and review of relevant external policies, processes, and documents. And so what we've come up with is a strategy that includes equity-driven community engagement alongside awareness and education component as outlined in the graphic on the screen. And we're looking at starting this, depending on the council direction that we receive this month, to start preparation and research over the next 2 months, then to move into the engagement and education component, which will run from roughly October until February of 2023, and summarize the engagement strategy and report back to council. And then we're looking at the implementation of those results, whatever they may be, starting around this time next year, so in about a year. So I'll go in a bit more detail. So next slide, please. So phase one is really focused on gathering and compiling research around the legacy of harm related to colonialism, and to develop education awareness materials for public engagement. And in the development of the engagement strategy, this includes things like, what do you want to see done with the statue? There are some options that are available that have been done with other statues in other municipalities, such as removal of the statue, commissioning new art, commissioning a response piece, or other things that may come from the community. And really the question is, what stories do you want to see represented? Because with the statue currently in place, it is representative of one history, one component of history, but doesn't necessarily represent other voices. And so in the development of an accompanying engagement and awareness campaign, we're looking at including research and background focused on the statue and its impacts, including the ongoing effects colonialism has had on Indigenous, Black, and racialized persons, and the development of education materials for public engagement and consultation. So that would be part of the consultation process in terms of the engagement. So next slide, please. So then phase two is the launch. So the engagement process, as I mentioned, this is an equity-driven engagement process. So there will be opportunities for the public at large to provide input while we prioritize the voices of those who've been impacted by colonialism, and specifically Indigenous, Black, and racialized community members. And then accompanying this will be an engagement or awareness campaign that is focused on the Queen Victoria statue, but is really part of a broader body of work that is acknowledging and addressing the impacts of that colonialism has had on Indigenous, Black, and other racialized populations. So this is one piece of a much larger conversation. Next slide, please. And so then the last two phases are the results. So we'll summarize the community engagement brought back to council with recommendations and potential next steps that came out of the engagement, and then following council direction, implement those results. And just wanted to go ahead and click out of that, I believe. Okay, so that is just a brief overview. So key to this process is really around the equity-driven community engagement. That is a key component of this, this strategy, and the education component. So education and helping people understand what it is that we're doing, why we're doing it the way that we are, and some of the things that people might not know about in terms of the history is really important for this piece. So I will leave it at that, and we can move on to, I believe, the delegations.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Councillor Gazzola, is your question imperative to ask now, or can we go to the delegations and you can ask your question first of staff after we're done the delegation?
Yes, I can save my questions. Sure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So now we will proceed with the delegations as listed on the agenda. I would like to remind all delegations of some guidelines for participation. You will be made a panelist prior to your name being called. Once you have joined the meeting as a panelist, you have access to your microphone and camera. Please leave your video camera off, turned off, and your microphone audio muted until you are called upon to speak. If you conduct yourself in any of the following manners, it will result in an immediate removal from the meeting: interrupting councillors, staff, or other delegations, derogatory statements about councillors, staff, or others, turning your cameras on at inappropriate times, and hate speech or defamatory comments. One last reminder for delegations: please do not take offense if following your presentation there are no questions from council. This is council's time to really listen and reflect upon the opinions and ideas shared with us from our community members. Before we start with the delegations, I forgot to say that there was written submissions by Erica Young and Sam Mercury, and a video submission by Justin Burr. So we'll start now with our delegations, and our first one is Angie.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're all doing well today. Thank you
Thank you.
for taking the time to hear me and share with you my perspective. I have walked the journey that you have walked to the City of Kitchener staff and to council. This journey is an important one. Indigenous people have not had their voices at the table. And similar to the experience that we experienced in Wilmot, have found a way to be heard. And we need to amplify their voices. And I speak to you all, as I said, of walking these shoes. I think it's imperative from the lessons that I've learned that I share with you, something that I reflect on and going forward that I would change if I was in your position now. I would deeply consider that you remove the statue first before having the consultation process. And I say this because psychology speaking, eliminating the harm is imperative to productive conversations and that lens. When we were able to remove the statues in Wilmot, the amount of healing conversations that were productive and the amount of progress our community has made in that healing, these steps have been remarkable. So many people who are in the marginalized community were fearful of engaging, fearful of being seen. When you have something erected that stands with the harm that's being caused to them, it's imperative that that action is taken to remove the statue first and then have that productive conversation. I know you have many delegations today. Thank you for taking the time to just listen to the walking the shoes that I have been part of. And I hope that
Thank you, Angie. I think we lost you at the end of that, but it might have just been my computer. Councillor Gazzola, did you have questions of Angie?
Yes, I do.
Okay,
sorry,
go
I
ahead.
had unstable internet connection there. I'm sorry. Could you repeat that?
Councillor Gazzola is going to ask you a question.
Thank you.
Angie, are you a resident of the City of Kitchener?
Mr. Gazzola, I am not a resident of the City of Kitchener.
Where are you a resident?
I'm a resident of the Township of Wilmot.
I don't quite understand your approach, and maybe I think I've walked a lot of journeys with my age, but I don't quite understand the approach of hiding the story or listening to just one side of the story. Where does that? How does that originate? What is behind that?
I think I'm going to have to ask you to clarify that question for me. I think, are you asking me yeah, I guess I just need more clarification to your question.
Yeah, I don't understand why you are recommending that before we do anything else, we remove the statue. We remove something that has been part of our history in this community for over 100 years. And I would like some firmer points to consider before changing something that's been in place for 100 years.
Okay, so people who are not Indigenous have been writing biased stories about Indigenous people for hundreds of years. You've probably read a lot of books like Little House on the Prairie. This series of books makes it seem like Laurel Ingalls and her family were doing a good thing, right? But the fact is that it was ignored that the land that they were settling on belonged to the Indigenous people. So while this history of the statue goes to 100 years ago, the truth be told, what is before that is more some of the story that we need to be telling. We as settlers have done an excellent job of telling our settled story. We need to do an excellent job of telling the story of the original inhabitants of this beautiful community that we all share under Waterloo Region.
Thank you. I'll leave it at that. I can't agree with what you're saying, but That's the beauty of this country, that you have the opportunity to come and say what you would like to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Gazzola. Thank you, Angie. That's all the questions that we have from you. Thanks for coming in today. Up next, we have David from Ground Up Waterloo Region.
Good morning, councillors. I would like to start by just thanking your housing staff for listening to folks in encampments yesterday and shifting their approach to one that was more compassionate. So I just wanted to start with a thank you to your team. I'm here today alongside other community partners to propose an amendment to the motion in the staff report. You should have received a copy of this motion already, and I hope the knowledge shared by my fellow delegates today gives you the courage to follow through with this direction. So I'll read through the motion now. That staff be directed to immediately remove the Queen Victoria statue from the plinth and move it to a private location, to launch an equity-driven community engagement process to gather ideas and feedback from the community with respect to what should replace the Queen Victoria statue located in Victoria Park, and to launch a public education process around the history related to Queen Victoria, the statue, and the impacts. You'll see this is very similar to what is in the report proposed by council. It just has the statue be removed before the consultation and shifts the focus of the consultation to where do we want to move forward in the future? What is the story we want to tell moving forward? So I wear many hats today, but the one I want to bring today is a community engagement professional and researcher. My graduate research explored therapeutic approaches to community engagement, and I worked on engagement projects at Sidewalk Labs, Waterfront Toronto, the Chief Planner's Office of the City of Toronto, Parkdale Neighborhood Land Trust, Cities of Migration, and the Yorklands Green Hub. And I want to continue to support the city as you pilot innovative approaches to community engagement and knowledge building. And so when we think of this idea of a therapeutic approach to planning and to community engagement, it sees consultation as a trauma-informed process and then works across harm to foster community transformation. So I'm concerned that the consultation as proposed without these amendments does not meet this standard of community engagement. You cannot have a trauma-informed and equity-driven consultation process with the agent of colonial harm still standing. The statue must come down first so that those traumatized by colonization can participate. Doing so also builds trust with those communities in the process and opens the door for a new equity-centered narrative for Willow River Park. And I'm using Willow River Park today as it is a name that has been chosen by the community as a safer alternative to Victoria Park, although obviously it's not official yet, but hopefully soon. Removing the statue prior to consultation also shifts the focus of your conversations and community education towards an equitable future. This is a significant shift, as the consultation as it stands now is centered on the statue. This forces those who have been harmed by colonization to have their trauma debated by the community. There is no debate. Folks harmed by colonization, such as Indigenous communities, Black communities, and communities from the Global South, should not have to spend the next 8 months of this process re-explaining these harms to the city. This is not an equity-driven consultation. So I hope you'll see this conversation as an opportunity to pilot a therapeutic model of community engagement. All around the world, communities are exploring how to transform colonial legacies into opportunities for equitable community building. And as Angie said, our neighbors in Wilmot recently went through a similar exercise with the Prime Minister's PATH initiative. At that time, I delegated to them with the same message. And thankfully, they removed the statues prior to the consultation. However, much harm was still caused by this process because it was still centered on the statue and not on moving forward and what is an equitable community. And because of that, more harm was caused. White supremacist groups such as the Urban Infidels took this opportunity to camp out beside the Tim Hortons. And as a former resident of Baden, my partner and I had to leave the community because of the racist and homophobic violence that they were shared in our community, making us and many others feel unsafe in Wilmot. And I would hate for that to happen in Kitchener as this conversation gets stretched out. The longer you take to make this decision, the more white supremacists and other bad actors will use it to cause harm. There are very real threats to people in the community of a long extended process, on top of having to repeat their stories of trauma and harm over and over again to make it, to ultimately, what you'll get in the end will most likely be the evidence you need to remove the statue. Just remove the statue now and then shift the conversation And it opens up so much more room for healing and education about what kind of future we want for our parks and our city. So I hope you will really deeply consider the amended motion we put forward. And I hope that by the end of this meeting, you'll feel comfortable enough to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, David, for your presentation. There is a question, Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I haven't seen this resolution recommendation. When was that sent out?
It would have been sent out earlier this week, but we have a disaggregated team, so maybe you were missed in the process. I can get it sent out to you right now via email.
So why wouldn't I have got it when it was originally sent? It's a little late now to ponder on a resolution, but nonetheless, I have a couple of other questions. In your speech here now, you talk about agents of colonial harm. What are they? Who are they? Should I be familiar with them?
Yeah, I think you should be familiar with them because this is a conversation that's been happening for a while now. And I'm pretty sure most of your colleagues are quite familiar with this. So in this conversation, we are talking about Queen Victoria and the legacy of harm that happened through the British colonization of North America, as well as around the world, because people from colonized countries around the world who were harmed and faced war and famine and other terrible atrocities because of Queen Victoria, their ancestors now live in our community and are grappling with those legacies of trauma. And every time they go now to Willow River Park, they have to see her be glorified. But the thing I think most importantly is we know that this is an agent of harm because we see folks who seek to instill violence come to these statues and cause violence around them. It happened in Wilmot, and I'm sure it will be happening in this community the longer we wait to remove the statue of Queen Victoria.
I'm puzzled with words here because do you know a lot of people that have been harmed by colonization? Do you know actual examples, or are these just words that you've heard?
Yeah, I know lots of examples, but I really think this is not the conversation to have. Everyone in this room should know people who maybe were a part of the transatlantic, whose ancestors are part of the transatlantic slave trade. Many of those people's ancestors are now in our community. People who maybe come from colonized communities in Africa, in Asia and South America, those descendants are now in our community as well. And of course, there are many Indigenous people in our community who had their land, who no longer have access to their land, who have had to face genocide and other harms, had to face the residential school system. So I think this is a pretty obvious question that there are many people who have experienced colonial harm.
All right, thank you. You're really referring to our ancestors. I'm not, haven't seen any of my ancestors for a while. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, David. Those are all the questions that we have for you. Up next, go ahead, Clerk.
Through you, the chair, I can confirm Melissa Bowman and Willow have not logged in, so I have advanced Samantha.
Okay, thank you. I think Melissa wasn't going to be here until a little bit later, so we will move on to Samantha then. Thank you.
Hello, thank you. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge that it is both Indigenous History Month and Pride Month. And so that while we're having these conversations, we should really be thinking of what the implications of our questions and the way that we interact with our delegations, especially when it comes to both the importance of those two historical months that we are celebrating. I'm going to talk numbers. I think there's going to be a lot of conversation about history and the reasons between how to do trauma informed research and that sort of thing, but I'm going to talk numbers. So in the last year, you've had 4 instances of the statue being covered in paint, which is roughly $20,000 in the last calendar year. And if you add the annual restoration fee of about $3,000, you're at $23,000 in total. when we look at the removal of like statues in our region, and I would highly suggest going back to Angie Hallman and talking about the experience that they had as a counselor in Wilmot and the extensive amount of work that was done to remove that statue and the conversations and the harm that's continually to be addressed now, years after the first incident. That whole cost for the statue to be removed from the Prime Minister's path and stored was roughly $10,000. So let's assume that there's 2 more instances of the statue in Willow River Park being covered in paint. So that's the equivalent of removing the statue and storing it. Just 2 more instances of paint being splashed on it and restoration being done. So if that's the equivalent of removing the statue and storing it, that removes the harm and is probably the same cost you're going to spend in the next month or so, assuming that we continue the same pathway that we did last year or this last calendar year. It also would be a significantly more equitable use of the same budget amount. To summarize, like Angie Hallman, she summarized the importance of removing the statue, both as someone who experienced it as a resident of a township that was going through a very extensive process and someone who was an elected official. And she did it so beautifully. And I would really suggest going to your colleagues in Wilmot and talking to them about the process and the harms that are continuingly to be addressed now, years after the process. So I echo her thoughts. I echo her suggested amendment to remove the statue first. I also echo the thoughts of David and the Ground Up delegation and their suggested amendments. You know, to summarize as a whole, please amend the proposed motion just to remove the statue first, along with the other recommendations that staff put in that report, and then please approve this amended motion as a whole. And finally, as someone who's a bit of a Robert's Rules nerd, I would really appreciate if counselors reflect on the use of Robert's Rules to allow for the option to move a point of privilege, especially as there might be conversations that come up in here that might actually harm some of the delegations. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I don't see any questions for you, but thank you very much for your presentation. Up next, we have Melissa Bowman.
Good afternoon, Council. Before I speak specific to the Queen Victoria statue, I just want to share a bit of my experience growing up. When I was a kid, I sometimes attended Sunday school where I heard many different Bible stories about Noah and the Ark, David and Goliath, and many others. Likely some of you are also familiar with these. Storytelling is an important and effective method for passing along a community's beliefs and values. However, as I grew older, I learned more about those stories that were actually filled with violence, pain, and terror. The only reason those were shared in Sunday school was because they had been sanitized, completely removed of all of the parts that adults assumed would be inappropriate to share with children. But as an adult, having learned the truth behind those stories, I can no longer hold on to those sanitized versions simply because they make me feel more comfortable than reality. I think that very much parallels my experience in learning about Canada's history, a history that included only passing references to Indigenous peoples who stewarded this land long before any European settlers arrived. There was little information in my school curriculum about the Indian Act, treaties, and residential schools. And the information that was shared was, much like those Bible stories, sanitized and removed of anything that might make us settlers feel uncomfortable. Thankfully, as an adult, I'm learning more about what imperialism and colonization really meant for Indigenous people on this continent. And we have a responsibility to not retreat to those sanitized stories of our childhood. That's why I'm in support of taking action on the Queen Victoria statue in Victoria Park. It seems to me that by leaving the statue in the park and continually cleaning up the red paint, that we are memorializing a sanitized history. We're putting the Queen on a literal pedestal, and our solution to concerns about the existence of the statue is to place a sign beside the statue. It's an odd thing to basically say, here is a thing that we know is hurtful, but we'll add a sign to acknowledge that we are at least aware of that. I think we have a responsibility to do much more, but knowing how to move in that direction can feel intimidating. It seems to me that we almost need some sort of 12-step program for settlers to help us take action. So I took a look at the well-known 12 steps, and I think we could update that for us settlers. For instance, we must make a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves, admit the exact nature of our wrongs, make direct amends to people we have harmed wherever possible, continue to take personal inventory, and when we are wrong, promptly admit it, carry this message to others, and to practice these principles in all our affairs. And perhaps that is a lighthearted way to look at this serious issue, but I do think there is some value in those steps. And we need to listen to individuals and communities who are most impacted by this statute. And then, this is key, actually act upon those conversations. I think our governments do a decent job on providing opportunities to hear from residents, but our record for following through on that needs improvement. In a recent piece in the Toronto Star, Ken Coates wrote, "Canada is desperately overdue for a rethinking of the many people and events we memorialize. Names and monuments should not be fixed for all time." And I agree. I appreciate that staff say this engagement process will prioritize the voices of Indigenous, Black, and racialized community members. However, we have already been through this process with Wilmot. Do we really expect our results in Kitchener to be so drastically different from Wilmot that we need to engage in a year-long process ourselves, or can we learn from our neighbors' experiences? If we do proceed with a year-long process on this, I assume the statue will remain for that entire time. And if that's the case, I think we need to stop cleaning up the paint. Let us sit with the discomfort of paint on that statue. Or as an alternative option, hire an Indigenous artist or a series of them to work with the statue over that period, encouraging us to reflect on the impact of colonization. I want to end with a reminder of what we want to avoid: the continued memorializing of a sanitized history that is meant to serve as a comfort to some in our community while causing harm to others. In a recent Globe and Mail article, author Tanya Talaga says the following: "The truth has been buried so deep that it failed to make it into decades worth of textbooks, classrooms, and university lecture halls. An entire history of the colonizers' treatment of Indigenous peoples and the truth about broken treaties was erased. This denialism over the years served to ensure that generations of lawmakers, teachers, politicians, journalists, and lawyers weren't raised to know what happened, which led them to further perpetuate the myth that nothing did." Thank you.
Thank you very much, Melissa. I do see a question from Councillor Gazzola. Go ahead, Councillor Gazzola.
Yes, thank you. In your discussion here, you are condoning vandalism when you say to leave the red paint on. Do you condone this vandalism if it were applied to say our war memorial statues and places like that? Or when should the law come into place? Or do we just go ahead? Sorry.
I'm happy to engage in what would be a very long conversation on that about what I think on that. But I would say if council is uncomfortable with that approach, that's why I suggested the other, that council could hire an Indigenous artist or several of them to engage with the statute in a way that may give a similar message that the red paint is doing.
But I guess the question is, you do condone vandalism in certain situations.
I'm saying that I think the message can be portrayed in a variety of ways. One of those options would be, if you're uncomfortable with red paint being put on it, engage with the Indigenous community and find artists that might also be able to encourage us to think on those ideas.
By throwing red paint, is that social activism or vandalism?
Again, I'm happy to have this conversation. I feel like it's not something I can answer in a minute. So I'm happy to engage with you afterwards about this.
Well, it appears to me that from your talk, you're condoning vandalism.
Okay, Councillor Gazzola, you've made your point.
Yeah, I will. I'll shut up. Sorry.
Thank you. That's all the questions we have for you, Melissa. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
Up next, we have Khalid. Go ahead, Khalid. You have 5 minutes for your presentation.
Good afternoon, Council. Just a bit of background about me before I commence. So I'm speaking to you today as a Canadian citizen with parents who were born in Afghanistan, and I was born in India and immigrated with my family to Canada in September 2002. I attended Forest Heights Collegiate in Kitchener, graduated from Wilfrid Laurier University and the Faculty of Law of Bond University in Australia and Osgoode Hall Law School in Toronto. My family and I have lived through political chaos, immigration issues, and met many issues as we sought to become fully part of the Canadian society. I've grown in terms of my family life, my education, and my legal profession to respect the constitutional monarchy of Canada for the sense of stability, dedication to service, and the rule of law. I cannot understand those who seek to suggest that our constitutional monarchy may not have a benefit to the majority of Canadians in that it inspired the buildings of universities, hospitals, libraries, museums, but more importantly, it has helped to create a nation in which individuals, families, and groups can live in peace and harmony. I'm saddened to see those who are angry and intolerant and with respect to claiming or wanting to destroy the heritage that is personified in the statute of Her Majesty Queen Victoria will bring goodwill and harmony to all Canadians. As a son of an immigrant Afghan family who has watched the destruction of that society, I pray that this will never happen in Canada. It begs the question, where will all this destruction end and what is the next target? I request counsel to not listen to the voices of anger who claim to be seeking harmony and reconciliation, but listen to those who seek to create a better and peaceful society by honoring all. It is time to stop tearing down and start building up all heritage and history. Thank you, Council.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I don't see any questions for you, but thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Up next, we have Richard. Go ahead, Richard. You have 5 minutes to make your presentation.
Sorry about the delay.
No worries.
All right, thank you. What I am about to say as a Canadian protected under the Charter of Rights and Freedom. What I am about to say may not fit in with everyone's view of political correctness. After I attended the meeting on Indian Road, I asked one friend whether he was offended by the word Indian. And he said, no, I've heard it both in my Indigenous community and outside of it. It is a debate that is being used to distract people from the goals and objectives of being important citizens in our society. If you really want to call me by my heritage, I am the son of an Oneida mother and a Blackfoot father. I respect my heritage as I do the heritage of which I have involved myself by my education and my career. I seek to use my career and my education to support my parents, my family, my community, and make a contribution to my job. I am sure that the Royal Commission did not expect their recommendations to disintegrate into half-truths and confrontation. The whole story about Queen Victoria is she was indeed Victoria Regina to many, but she was also the great white mother to many of the Indigenous community. And there are those who prefer not to think in those terms. History informs us that major nations can disintegrate into conflict and chaos by those who break windows, by those who attack others and write slogans and create a climate of fear. When I told my friends I was about to attend this meeting, they said, "Richard, don't do it. What are they going to do to you if they throw bricks at your window?" That members of council disrespected you when you appeared as a delegation. And more importantly, what are you going to do if the media chooses to accentuate some of your comments out of context? And my daughter said, "Dad, you've done enough." However, I could not stand by and see a community that I dedicated my time and energy to fall into chaos, nor a country that I live in not being supporting its heritage and history by our political, social, religious, and community leaders. We are a nation who deserves better, respecting both the Indigenous and the non-Indigenous community. So what to do? Put a light on the statue of Queen Victoria. Monitor it by TV monitors. Have the mayor address council at the regional level to ask for increased protection. And while I do not want to suggest what the mayor should do with his time and energy, may I propose that the mayor invite the Indigenous community to lay a wreath at the foot of this statue as an indication of peace, harmony, and goodwill, so we can move on as individuals. As my Oneida friend said to me, "Richard, I was lost in second-year university. You came alongside of me and put me under your wing and saw potential I did not know I had. Yoka, thank you in Oneida. Let us all stop arguing with each other and move on and support those individuals who are angry and discouraged by love and respect. Let us move on and help those who are having trouble be supported by our encouragement and inspiration. Let us start to build a community after this period of social unrest, anger, and may I say it, hatred towards one another." Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard, for your presentation. I do not see any questions for you. Thank you for coming in this afternoon.
You're welcome.
Okay, up next we have Cheyenne.
Hello.
Hi,
My name
welcome.
is Sorry?
I just said welcome.
Oh, thank you. Sorry. Okay, my name is Cheyenne Thorpe. I hail from the Lenape people of the Delaware Nation at Moraviantown, and I have been a resident of the Waterloo region for more than 10 years now. I have 2 young Indigenous children living with special needs growing up in this community, and I am here to ensure that Council is prepared to keep its pledge towards truth and reconciliation for the sake of their well-being and their futures. I am here today to address the Council regarding the issue of the Queen Victoria statue currently situated at Victoria Park in Kitchener. I am in support of the statue being immediately removed and relocated to a private location to help reduce harm and protect our communities from potential danger and conflict surrounding the statue's presence. In June of 2020, myself and other volunteers began organizing efforts to increase community education and engagement surrounding the complicated history of our nation's first Prime Minister, John A. Macdonald. These efforts were fueled by a similar event that took place at Castle Kilbride in Baden, Ontario, where a former statue of John A. Macdonald was covered in red paint, symbolizing the blood of the Indigenous communities that stains his hands. Our requests were clear-cut for the entire community to understand. Allow the paint to remain on the statue of John A. Macdonald until the structure can be permanently removed, as well as the remainder of the statues of former prime ministers that were also located at Castle Kilbride. Throughout our efforts to work alongside the council while creating opportunity for community engagement through the means of peaceful protest, many of our supporters were harassed, targeted, and belittled for their actions. Racial and homophobic slurs were plentiful, threats of violence and bodily harm were running rampant, and ignorance was becoming dangerous, fueling the flames of conflict and detrimental fear to exist in our own communities. Dangerous extremists known as the urban infidels surrounded us, spewing messages of white supremacy and hate while making it a mission of theirs to threaten us with violence in protection of the statue and the colonial governance that it stood for. Many of us were individually targeted, not only in person at peaceful gatherings, but are also all over social media, as well as in the comment sections of all news reporting or publications. We were targeted by individuals who didn't agree with our message. We were targeted by individuals who wanted to see us physically harmed or suffering. We were targeted by elected leaders who called us outsiders and made us feel as if our land was never ours to begin with. But we were also embraced. We reached the hearts of thousands of individuals through the means of peaceful protests, circulating petitions, and embracing the most effective parts of media engagement, while practicing our civil liberties at a time when it was dangerous, but necessary to be doing so. Many from the community sat with us, struggled with us, and supported our efforts right until the very end of the process. They recognized the importance in the work that was being done, and that helped carry us through the difficulty of actually doing the work. In the end, despite all hardship and traumatic experiences, we were successful in carrying through a message of truth while re-educating the public about the history of our nation and the immense amounts of harm that it caused Indigenous communities. The statue of John A. Macdonald was removed on September 3rd, 2020, with consultations set to begin surrounding the remainder of the statues. Recommendations were later made by the First Peoples Group to immediately remove all remaining statues and discontinue any further expansion or investment into the project. History will show that the creation and implementation of the residential school system came under the rule of Queen Victoria, directing leaders like John A. Macdonald and others to commit what we now know to be acts of genocide towards the Indigenous people. To quote Nguyen Sinclair, a Native Studies professor at the University of Manitoba, Queen Victoria presided during some of the most brutal and expansive years of colonial history, when the land was stolen the most, and when things like the Indian Act were put into place. Adele Perry, the director for the Center of Human Rights Research and a professor in the Department of History at the University of Manitoba, also reminds Canadians that Queen Victoria and the British Empire had an absolutely crucial role in Canada's negotiation of treaties, residential schools, and other systems that dispossessed Indigenous people. The Crown oversaw boarding and mission schools that served to separate children from Indigenous people which served to separate children from the Indigenous people or other parts of the British Empire, which served as examples for Canada's residential schools. Queen Victoria's legacy lives on today through the means of government inaction when it comes to issues like higher incarceration rates for Indigenous people, a disproportionate number of Indigenous children in the welfare system, lack of clean drinking water on First Nations reservations, police brutality towards Indigenous individuals, and many more pertinent and damaging situations. When this council claims to be committed to truth and reconciliation, and it is an issue of a statute that is causing harm to communities when consultation has been done time and time again, this is a perfect opportunity to practice reconciliation now that truth regarding these colonial figures idolized in bronze has been established. I believe that relocating the statue to a private location until an equity-driven community engagement process can take place is an efficient, respectful option to help utilize to reduce harm, conflict, and potential danger surrounding the statue while decision-making takes place. I also believe that this region should be increasing public education surrounding the history related to Queen Victoria and the negative impacts her rule had over Indigenous communities. Winishi, I apologize for going over time.
That is okay. Thank you very much for your presentation. There appears to be a question for you, Councillor Marsh.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to ask you, Cheyenne, first of all, thank you so much for sharing the impact and your experiences of what happened in Wilmot. And it takes a lot to, a lot of courage. So thank you. I do want to ask you, do you see the impact of this statue to be on par, the same as the ones that were removed in Wilmot? Do you see them exactly the same level of impact or not?
I do. Absolutely. The fact of the matter is at this moment in history, everybody played a role in it. Everybody would just had as equal as a role and condone the actions that were being done. And that goes right up to our queen, right? And that would follow all of the prime ministers that were in that era. And I believe it wasn't until, I think it was the 90s, like the late 90s, that the last residential school actually closed. Personally, I don't believe idolizing figures in bronze is a good way to pay homage to any of our figures of history. I believe that there are much more appropriate and respectful ways of doing so. But yeah, I do believe that everybody was that participated in that era, and that condoned the actions, and that made it regular practice and every day, yes, does play a role of guilt and should not be idolized in bronze in our public parks.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. There's another question from Councillor Gazzola. Sorry.
Yes, thank you for clarifying how you feel that everyone that's been involved with government over this period of time is really guilty of this harm. Now, all members of council sitting here today, before we start our term, we pledge allegiance to the reigning monarch, Queen Elizabeth. I guess we too then are part of this harmful group that has caused so much harm because of colonization. Simple question. We are part of the group.
Yeah, you're asking if you're part of that group. I think that there are members of our regional constituency that are actively putting efforts towards reconciliation, not only reconciliation, but the truth that comes behind that, and making amends to be able to assist communities and reduce harm, as opposed to arguing or fighting or defending the actions of those of our historical leaders. And if those are the actions in which certain leaders or counselors are choosing to take, then yes, I do believe that they're continuing to perpetuate the harm that our communities had to face, and that helped to put a great stain on the nation that we pay our allegiance to in the monarch. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming in today. That's all the questions that we have for you, Cheyenne. Up next, we have Caleb.
Hello.
Hi, welcome. You have 5 minutes to make your presentation.
Lovely, thank you. All right, so thanks for creating space today for our community to speak on the issue of the Queen Victoria statue in the park named in her honor. I'm delegating today. I believe we should remove the statue. I've heard from my neighbors speaking about the harm that the statue does, and I'm supportive of removing the statue even just for that reason. But I wanted to delegate today because I recently read a book discussing transitional justice. Transitional justice includes reconciliation, and the book has a section discussing memorials, which I thought would be helpful in this discussion. So the book is Human Rights and Transitional Justice in Chile, and it's by Hugo Rojas and Miriam Shafto. There are a couple of points that I found especially relevant to this discussion. So first, they discuss collective memory in a society. To quote them, whereas history tells us what happened in the past, memory deals with how we understand the past in the present, what we remember and what we forget. So the authors emphasize that, and I'm quoting again, collective memory is a space in dispute and in permanent construction. Battles over historical memory occur, and memory entrepreneurs use the controversial nature of memory for political gain. Society's interpretation of collective memory is constantly being challenged and updated. Rojas and Shafto also discuss the role of government relating to memorials. So they say, the state plays an important role in establishing an official account of the past, which can contribute to creating greater social acceptance, understanding, and recognition of this shared history. Official acts of memorialization and commemoration can have a symbolic reparative role. This is particularly important for victims, as the way others value and recognize their experiences can contribute to either restoring or undermining their dignity. For instance, many victims fight to protect and restore sites of human rights abuses in order for the population at large to better understand what happened to them. So a good example in our context of victims fighting to protect and restore sites of human rights abuses is the Woodland Cultural Center in Brantford. So the book also references the United Nations guidance notes on transitional justice, which also emphasize the responsibility of states to educate society and memorialize victims of human rights abuses. I believe that maintaining a larger-than-life statue honoring Queen Victoria in the middle of a prominent park pushes the narrative that our community is based on the British monarchy. It minimizes the legacy of colonization, and it minimizes the good work that many in our community are doing toward reconciliation. I don't think it reflects a more accurate, current, and forward-thinking concept of our community of present-day residents from around the world living on the traditional land of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Neutral peoples. I think that it's clear that we should be able to confidently remove the statue without delay. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, Caleb, for coming in this afternoon. I don't see any questions for you, so thank you very much.
Have a nice day.
You as well. Up next is Amy. Welcome, Amy.
Oh, yo na sego sawagwego Amy Smoke Young gets Kinyanka Hagani'i. My status card says my name is Amy Smoke and I am Mohawk Nation Turtle Clan. I'm from the Six Nations of the Grand River. I am also one of the co-founders of Osiganhu Hadaje Landback Camp in KW and a sessional instructor at the University of Waterloo. I do want to thank David, Angie, Sam, Melissa, Caleb, and in particular Cheyenne, also a fellow First Nations, a living, breathing First Nations person in the community currently affected by the effects of colonialism. Landback Camp spent much of our time in Willow River Park. And we can tell you with great certainty of the daily effects that these types of statues have on members of the Indigenous communities. There are also more than 50,000 First Nations, Métis, and Inuit folks here in Kitchener-Waterloo. And we are right next to the largest reserve by population on Turtle Island here in Northern Canada. There are many people affected every single day. It's unfortunate then that we have to participate in the very colonial structures that seek to oppress us in order to trot out our trauma so that you can take very actionable, very tangible steps to take away the continued trauma. I unfortunately am not joined by Bangui Shimo. We do have other things we should be doing right now. I spoke to a high school class this morning. I will be speaking to university students this afternoon. And we continue to run Landback Camp, which should be a safe space in all public spaces. We're also engaged in the places and spaces conversations. And I'm not sure that folks understand what safety means to Black, Indigenous, and racialized people here in KW, and what that should mean for spaces like Willow River Park. If they are currently building permanent space for Indigenous communities to gather, it should definitely not be under the gaze of the Great White Mother. I think we can drop that colloquial phrase. So again, I don't have very much time. I do want to thank you. And if there are any questions, I would certainly entertain them. A little bit rattled by some of the comments I've heard here today. I would certainly encourage a public education period for folks like yourself and settler non-Indigenous Canadians, but the statue should be removed. I fully support the amendments. We are telling you a very real, actionable thing that you can do when we speak of reconciliation. And are we reconciling? How about conciliation? Let's start building the better relationship. because we know the relationship has not been very fair, very equal, very just. So let's start here. You have a chance to make the city safer for the original inhabitants on this stolen land. Precedent has been set. Wilmot Township showed you and continues to show you the daily harm that was felt by the Indigenous folks and settler allies with the continued process. So remove the statue. Now go.
Thank you very much, Amy, for your presentation. I don't see any questions for you, but thank you for taking your time and coming in this afternoon. Much appreciated. Up next, we have Justin.
My apologies, Chair. Zoom is disagreeing just a little bit. Here comes Justin for you.
Okay, thank you. Hi, Justin. Welcome. You have 5 minutes to make your presentation.
Thanks. Hello, councillors. I want to begin by echoing the calls from other delegates for council to immediately remove the statue and take tangible actions against the symbols of colonialism and genocide. I'm going to give you some short history about this statue so you fully understand what message you are sending by proposing a process that will leave the statue up for almost a year longer or more. As you may know if you read the report, the statue was commissioned by the Imperial Order Daughters of the Empire. Their motto was one flag, one throne, one empire. Not only were they ardent supporters of Britain's genocidal expansion of empire, they also advocated for white supremacist immigration policies. The same year the statue went up, IODE was also petitioning the government to ban Black immigrants in Western Canada. They wrote, "We view with alarm and continuous and rapid influx of Negro settlers. This immigration will have the immediate effect of discouraging white settlement in the vicinity of Negro farms and will depreciate the value of all holdings within such areas. And while the IODE may have tried to rehabilitate their image in modern times, their website still proudly cites their support for Britain's colonial war in South Africa. This is the same war for which the city's namesake, Lord Kitchener, rose to prominence for a scorched earth policy and popularization of the use of concentration camps. Over 25,000 women and children died in these camps. I think it's super important for us to understand the history behind these monuments and who put them here in the first place. Almost everywhere you look, you see in the city, we give honor to those who orchestrated white supremacy and genocide on a massive scale. Specifically, the statue is a monument to a person who oversaw the invasion of Turtle Island and the genocide of Indigenous peoples here. This statue is a monument to colonialism and white supremacy. It was commissioned by a group championing white supremacy and colonialism, and now we have a council that has dutifully maintained the statue and refused to reckon with its meaning. As council, you have the power to change this and immediately remove this monument to white supremacy. Your actions on this matter will tell the community much more about your values than any statement or sign you could put up. So please stop siding with hundreds of years of white supremacy and colonialism and actually do the right thing. Take down the statue. And I'd also like to recommend counselors take some history courses or courses on the history of nonviolence to understand what the meaning of red paint might be and how vandalism and endorsing it or not endorsing it has different meanings.
Thank you very much, Justin, for your presentation and for coming in this afternoon. Is there any questions? I don't see any, so thank you very much for taking the time. It's much appreciated. Up next, we have Shifaza.
Thank you. It's pronounced Shifaza, like a
Sorry.
chef. As Aza. That's okay. It's something I've lived with. Thank you so much for having me here today. I have heard so many comments from the people before me, and I just want to add to that that I do support the removal of the Queen Victoria statue from Victoria Park. There was a question about, do you know people who are affected by colonial legacy? I was born in Tanzania. Tanzania was colonized by the Germans first and then the British. When the British took over from the Germans, there was this statue of General Bismarck on top of what is now called Bismarck Rock, and that was promptly removed when the British took over. So right now we're left with the legacy of a Bismarck Rock in the middle of Lake Victoria. There are definite impacts of colonial legacy. I actually went to a school called Victoria Public School when I was younger, and it gave me a taste of what residential school must have been like for folks here. I was very surprised to hear that the last residential school closed down in 1990s. The real trauma that leaves you with is painful. And to have a memory of something like the statue of Queen Victoria celebrated in an environment where the rule of Queen Victoria is tumultuous and has caused torment to generations of people, not just in what is called Canada, but also around the world, such as Tanzania. I think that in order to have conversations where we can be level and not have power dynamics, it is important that we remove the symbol of power, which is the statue. And I really appreciate that there are going to be these consultations and education and awareness, because this was something that was very lacking when I moved to Canada. I learned a little bit because of my parents. They were taking the course for getting citizenship, and there was a little bit in that about the Indigenous history, but not as much as I have now realized there is in terms of history. So yes, we do need to change our narratives of how we are portraying the history of this land. But in order to do that, to really have these conversations and have a level power dynamic, or not have power dynamic, is to remove the symbol of power. Currently, right now, for example, you are council people, you hold power. I'm here as a delegate. I'm very scared. This is the first time I'm speaking as a delegation. And just this is causing me to tremor, right? So imagine what having a power symbol would do to ongoing consultations with community. So to make sure that we are having these conversations in a meaningful and engaging way, we need to remove that symbol of power. And I say this because I also have done research where I had to go through ethics in order to be able to do interviews. And there is a very real concern about power dynamics. We go through a whole module where we learn about the Stanford experiment and how that played a big role in trauma for the people who were involved. So symbols of power are important to acknowledge and remove when we want to have meaningful conversations. That's all I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And you did a fantastic job. We wouldn't have known you were nervous at all. You did a great job. Thank you. And thank you so much for taking the time to come in this afternoon. We really appreciate it. It doesn't appear to have any questions, so thank you again for your time.
Thank you. Have a
Okay. Clerks, did you have something that you wanted? Is there any more delegations, or was that the last one?
That was the last delegation.
Okay, great. Okay, now we can have questions of staff. I don't see any question. Oh, there we go. Mayor Verbanovich.
Well, thank you very much, Chair Galloway-Sealock. And I'm not sure if my question is for Alan or Jake, both of whom were involved in writing this report. I'm just wondering, because in the slideshow, it referenced, that the statue has been subject to some social activism and criticism. And there's no question that that's true. But have we, I believe, and staff can correct me if I'm wrong, we've also heard from people both today and previously who feel equally strongly about the statue remaining in the park. Is that correct?
Ellen?
So through the chair, so far, we actually had no consultation with the public in any way. And which is the purpose of launching this process. So other than the paint being applied to the statue, we don't know anything more about the way people feel about the statue, other than what's being, I'm not counting what's being said on social media. So I mean like actual having conversations with people. And so, right now we don't have anything to base anything on in terms of
So staff isn't aware of any of the input that's come in through the call center, or emails that have come to the city on either side of the issue?
Nope, not at this time.
Okay. I guess my question to either you or Jake would be, when it comes to and there's no question that this is a very difficult and complex issue. Is it reasonable to assume that, just as in amongst settlers, there's a range of viewpoints on an issue, that we might in fact see something similar amongst Indigenous community or other individuals who come from cultures where that have a colonial history? In other words, there may be a range of views on how we should potentially deal with this issue. Is that a reasonable assumption?
Through the chair, I would say that is a reasonable assumption. I think we will see a range of viewpoints on this issue from both Indigenous, racialized, Black communities, as well as white settler communities. And the purpose of doing an equity-driven engagement is to really prioritize the voices for those who've been harmed by colonialism.
And I certainly hear you on that, and that needs to be certainly ultimately a factor that needs to be factored. But I guess, based on your recommendation, what I'm gathering is staff feel it is important that we hear from the community, because this is a community park, one that's used by all citizens. And while it's certainly important to hear and factor in through an equitable lens the impacts of those who have been affected, it is also important to hear from other community members.
Through the chair, yes, indeed. We do need to involve the whole community in the decision making. And, just a few people don't speak for their whole communities, and that goes, across the board. So talking, getting input from many people is the most important process for this engagement within the equity-driven framework, as I said.
Okay, and I guess my question maybe Alan, for Jake would be, if he was here, I'm not sure if he's still here.
Yep.
Hey, welcome, Jake. Thank you. Are you aware, in terms of dealing with these kinds of issues, from the work that you've done and the expertise that you bring, are you aware of situations where, some communities may have chosen to remove something, but others have looked at other options, such as adding components that contextualize, educate, and so on as part of the process? Are you familiar with any of that from your expertise?
Through the chair this is an experience or an issue that's recently come to my thinking. I've been in other experiences where not necessarily things have been removed, like statues, but the most comparable one I can speak to and share with you is recently that I was involved in was up in my territory when it came to commercial fishing. There was a lot of discussion and some heated discussion, and the only things that were taken or removed, not by Indigenous or First Nation people in this territory, were the nets and boats that were being used by community members from my community and from our sister community, the Saugeen First Nation. But when it comes to this particular issue around statues, this is something that's been recently and freshly put into my thinking, but no experiences myself. I haven't come to that experience. I've been thinking with Alan and others about this.
I just seem to recall, and I'm not sure if it was a conversation with staff or others, of some examples. For example, a statue had additional components added to it. I believe it was some canoes and some educational plaques to go with it, and so on, to contextualize. But I can't recall the details of that. So I was hoping that maybe staff had those, but I'll go back and research that.
So I can speak to that, Mayor Bogdanovich.
Sure.
So through the chair, yeah, that was in one of the reports that I provided to council ahead of this meeting. And it was, I did do quite a bit of extensive research on some examples of what other cities or other municipalities have done with statues. And so there is, there's a couple of different options. Some of them have been removed. Some of them have been moved to other locations. Others were toppled. And in some cases, what they've done is added to the statue as a response piece or as something to add to the history. So we're not just seeing one story. And the example that you're thinking of is in New Zealand, where there is a statue of Queen Victoria. And they did commission Indigenous Maori artists to erect 2 Maori canoes, one on either side of the statue, along with some educational plaques and information. So that's what they did with the statue. And that was something that their community chose to do. And they did, extensive engagement with the Maori communities as well. And so that's one example of how the statue is sort of reimagined with, additional voices and additional stories being told.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Up next is Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you. So I have a question maybe for you, Alan. Given what we've heard today, and I appreciate the importance of approaching this from an equity lens, equitable lens. And I know you can't take, just what we've heard today and consider that all voices by any means, but what do you think to get out of the consultation? Like when we think of the statues that were brought down in Wilmot, and we and the time and the care that was put into that, do you have any sense of where we might land at the end of a year-long process? Maybe it's an unfair question, but.
So through the chair, no, I mean, this is a good question. And I think it's a question on a lot of people's minds. So, I mean, part of the question is, what will this process bring? And so I just sort of mentioned what some of the options could be in terms of removal of the statue, commissioning new art to replace the statue, commissioning art to accompany the statue. So those are a couple of different options. I mean, I can't I can't predict which one we're going to go with, but essentially the important part is that we launch an engagement process where community input is part of the decision making. And if we're, regardless of whether we remove the statue or don't remove the statue, we need a plan to move forward with. And in order to develop that plan, we need to speak to the community. And so we're looking at, so in the research that I've done, I've already mentioned some options that are out there. There's not a lot of options. So part of the engagement will be, to get more options, like what else could we do with this statue? If what do people want to see? So we're looking for more ideas and feedback that we don't necessarily have to start from. So it's not going to be a prescriptive process where we're going to say, okay, here's the 2 options and we're going to do one of them. It's more about, let's open this up to the community and ask people what they would like to see. And so that's really, the outcome is really to gather that from the community and be able to make recommendations to council based on that.
And how do you balance the harm through this process and the trauma that has been expressed by the delegations?
So in terms of, I'm not sure what exactly, can you just elaborate on what you mean by that in terms of
Yeah, I mean, it's a process that that staff is proposing to go through the consultation process, but at the same time, we've got that people are saying, but this is impacting me in a very negative way.
Mm-hmm.
So how, I think of my kids when they were younger, and if harm was in the way, I would address it, right? I wouldn't put it off for a year and then act. So I'm just wanting you to tell me how I can balance this, the comments we've heard from people in the community with what we're proposing to do here through the consultation process.
Yeah, so through the chair, what we're proposing is a strategy that was developed through sort of a lot of research and consultation with staff and that sort of thing. But essentially, it would be council's decision to take into consideration what was brought today by the delegations and provide us with direction moving forward. And I think, I don't think that it's an issue of balancing the harm. I think people who feel strongly and are harmed by the presence of the statue, our engagement process isn't going to fix that. It's what we're aiming to do is make changes. And this is the process that we're going through to make change. And, this is the sort of, and part of it will be the education piece and acknowledging that this is a really important component of the project in terms of providing public education. But in terms of what the process is, I think we're looking at this process as the balanced way to move forward when it comes to this issue. And but again, it's based on council direction.
I don't know if my time is gone because the clock is frozen.
Yeah, if you have another question, you can go ahead and then you'll have to queue back in.
Okay, so my other question was, can you maybe tell us why you didn't consider the removal of the statue while going through the process of the consultation process? Like, I assume you considered it, but it's not being recommended.
So through the chair, process, like as I mentioned, process is important, and it's important and community input is important in decision making. So as I mentioned in response to Mayor Ivanovich's question, there has not been a conversation with the community about the statue. Yes, of course, we understand the perspectives of a few members of the community. But we also don't know who is responsible for the paint or whether these actions represent the voices of others in the community. And again, the actions of one or two people in the community do not speak for the whole community. So launching equity-driven engagement is really focused on prioritizing the voices of those who've been directly harmed by the legacy of colonialism. And we don't want to presume that one or two voices represent all the voices. I mean, just from an engagement and a democracy perspective, that's not the process that we use here. And so, yeah, so in order to, we need a plan to move forward. And in order to develop that plan, we need to speak to the community. And so far that has not happened. And I don't know if Mr. Linklater, if you wanted to add to anything, or wait, is Jake still on the call? Oh yeah, there you are, sorry. I don't know if you had anything to add.
Not at this time, Ellen. I think that the response is very good.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Up next is Councillor Gazzola.
Thank you. I really struggle with this. So will you again help me to understand what is an equity-driven community engagement process? What is that exactly? Or why am I struggling with it?
So through the chair, great question, Councillor Gazzola. So equity-driven community engagement is the process of ensuring that we are hearing from and prioritizing the voices of those who have been traditionally excluded, underrepresented, discriminated against, or harmed in the past. I mean, in general, that's what the process is. It's so within our society, if we were to put out a call for engagement, and we've done this many times at the city. When we collect demographic data on who we're hearing from, so any question that we put out to the community, who are we hearing from? We generally tend to hear from people who are fairly homogenous, and they tend to be white, Canadian-born, sort of middle class, folks who have the time and resources to respond to those questions. And it's not just us, it's that's in general who engages in the world, because they have the privilege to do that, they have the time. And so from an equity-driven perspective, we want to make sure that we are reaching people who are the ones who are impacted by the issue. And so it's different for every issue. So if we were doing equity-driven engagement for another issue, we might be looking at a different different group of people. And so in this case, we are hoping to reach and have conversations with and build sort of engagement processes with folks who have been impacted by the legacy of colonialism and who have already, we've heard in the community, have expressed some concerns about the presence of this statue. It doesn't mean that we're not going to speak to other people in the community, because we are. This is going to be a broad public engagement, and other folks who are not in those groups will also be able to contribute. But from an equity-driven perspective, we just want to make sure that we're prioritizing those voices.
Why should certain voices be prioritized? Why are not all voices equal?
So if we lived in a society where everyone was treated equally, then it would make sense that all voices would be equal, but that's not the case. And we have, hundreds of years of anti-Indigenous racism, colonialism, like misogyny. There's lots of different things that have made people in society very unequal and valued differently. And maybe we'll get to that place at some point in the future, but right now, the reason that we do equity work, the reason that our entire equity division with our 5 staff members exist, is because we've acknowledged as a corporation that people are not valued or treated equally in our society. So to go about doing our work with the assumption that everyone is equal and that everyone will be listened to equally is completely incongruent with the fact that we actually have a commitment towards doing equity.
Okay, has there been any good that has resulted from colonialism?
So through the chair, I'm not sure that this question is relevant to the report or to the task at hand. So I'm going to decline answering that.
The report keeps talking about the harm of colonialism. So has there been any good come from colonialism? Is this not a two-way street, or is it a one-way street?
Point of order.
Point of order. Go ahead, Councillor Marsh.
Yeah, I understand Councillor Gazzola's line of questioning, asking all of our delegates, regardless of their personal experience and the harm that's been done to them personally. You're asking them questions, and really we should have called you out on it earlier. But right now, you're asking if colonialism has done any good. And that's outside the scope of this conversation. This is not helpful to our discussion whatsoever. So I would ask that we stay on the topic.
Well, Councillor Marsh, I don't agree with you. As I said, the report talks time and time again of the harm of colonialism. So there are two sides to every story.
Okay, I don't think we need to go into the harm and the good that potentially was done during colonialism. I think we need to just keep moving forward with the task at hand.
All right, with that, I will not ask any more questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gazzola, for your questions. Up next is Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Chair Galloway-Sealock. First of all, I want to thank all the delegations for coming forth. It's not easy to relive your trauma and your pain and your hurt. I've been quite moved, to be honest with you, by what I've heard today. And I'd like to ask staff, as has been suggested, delegations that have asked for the statute to be removed and then have the conversations. Like, none have asked for it to be destroyed. It could be removed, moved to a private location. We could have the discussions, and who knows, maybe after discussions it returns. We don't know. But is it absolutely essential that the statute remain while the process would begin and be underway?
So through the chair, if this is the direction of council, then staff would proceed with this as the process.
Okay, but I'm sorry, and I don't want to put you on the spot or anything. I just, you've done a lot of work and a lot of research on this, and Jake has too. And I don't want to put you on the spot. I'm not trying to criticize. I just want your expert opinion on this, like the best way to proceed, because we've heard that it continues to cause pain, and it does maybe make someone not want to come forward. So anyway, I just would love to know that.
So just to follow up, so through the chair, this isn't the option that staff is recommending. And so I don't feel like we can speak to recommendations outside of the report right now.
Okay.
But if that's the direction that council would like to go in, then that's staff would move forward in that direction.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And another thing I just want to know, have we considered having this up as one of our questions or research through Engage Kitchener, where we could maybe get a very quick feeling on where things might be going?
So through the chair, one of the tactics that we would be using in the engagement plan is Engage Kitchener, but that's something that would be coming in phase 2 of the project, which would be in the fall.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you for your questions. Up next is Councillor Marsh.
Yeah, thanks. I I'm going to just ask staff a similar question to Councillor Schneider's, but I'll try to take it from a different angle. If you can just help us understand what the harm would be, what additional harm would be in removing the statue while conducting the community dialogue.
So through the chair, at this time, we have not fully explored any harm associating with removing the statue during the engagement. I'm not sure that this is, that this isn't something that was stated in the report in terms of it causing harm.
Okay. Madam Chair, I'm not sure if somebody is going to move that motion or not, but I'm interested to see it come forward if they are.
So you're not moving anything right now?
Well,
no one's moved anything, so
No, I know, but
you can wait.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Councillor Singh? Councillor Singh, we can't hear you. Or I couldn't hear you. No. No. So we'll see if Councillor Singh can figure out his concerns with his technology. Mayor Verbanovic, did you want to have something to say?
Yeah, well, just to try to help Councillor Singh out, if staff can mute him and then ask him to unmute, sometimes that helps. It doesn't seem to be. I do have a question, Madam Chair, then for you from a process point of view. The item that was on the agenda today was an item focused around engaging in a process that involved community engagement. It didn't involve removal of the statue as part of the discussion. We heard from some delegations today and ahead of time that they're asking for us to actually remove it now as part of the process, and ultimately, I think it's fair to say that group would see it removed on a permanent basis. My concern is that there's been no real opportunity. Other than the people that are here asking for it to be removed today, there's been no real opportunity for the broader community to be involved and have a say in this. And I would anticipate that there would be some significant concern around that, and people who would view themselves as also being harmed if that action were undertaken without an opportunity for them to have that notice and to know that in fact they will their views will be equally considered by council. And so I'm just wondering around if you're going to be entertaining a motion for removal today, which certainly I won't be able to support. I'm just wondering how, I just procedurally, I'm not sure that's necessarily appropriate from a community point of view. I think if we're looking at shortening the consultation period, lengthening it, those kinds of things are certainly in the cards, but to actually do the removal of the statue, I guess I'm questioning whether or not, in fact, that's a reasonable approach. And maybe that's a question for the clerk.
Yeah, I think I would turn to the clerk on that, but there may be an opportunity if somebody wanted to bring forward a notice of motion, because this comes back to council on the 20th, I believe is the date, that there may be an opportunity for a notice of motion for that, but I look to the clerk to answer your question.
Through the chair, there is currently no motion on the floor. So a member of council would be permitted to bring forward a motion. If that included the removal of the statue, they would have the opportunity to do so at this time. So this is the item on the agenda. And while it is not the staff recommendation as outlined in the report, a member could bring forward an alternative motion.
Okay, thank you.
Wow, okay. That surprises me as advice from the clerk, but thank you.
Councillor Singh, do you want to give it a try again?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Switched over from a different device. Can you hear me now?
We can, yes.
Okay, perfect. So my apologies. I just want to quickly carry on from what Councillor Marsh was asking in respect to potential harm if the statue was removed. And I can appreciate that that's not necessarily the staff's recommendation. I just want to ask for clarity in consideration of harm. Would some of that information be required if council were to move in that direction? And it may be helpful for us to know the related costs and primarily where that statue would be stored or placed, as well as the integrity and consideration, I guess, the integrity of the statue itself. Meaning, would it survive the removal, the moving, and then depending on what the ultimate outcome would be? Would staff have to determine all those aspects before giving any strong opinion about those potential costs or harm?
Go ahead, Ellen.
Through the chair. So yeah, we can figure all of that out if that's staff direction, if that's council direction, and that's something that you would like us to do in terms of the cost and where it would be stored and what the process would be. So that's something that if that was at the request of council, that is something that we could come up with fairly quickly.
Okay. Well, Madam Chair, that's not necessarily what I'm maybe recommending. It's not a motion on the table, but I just wanted to add some caution that rather than us directing staff to explicitly take that route, we would need some of that extra information as well. If just within my time, if I can quickly ask one other question, and this was brought forward by one of the delegates, and it's I think it's a reasonable compromise or action of conciliatory effort as we engage the public and especially equity-seeking groups in input as to what to do with the statue or what that statue means to them. What would be the, I guess, issue or concern or even cost related with moving forward with having a additional art piece adjacent to the statue? And again, as the suggestion was from perhaps a Indigenous artist, that could further stimulate, encourage that community dialogue and discussion.
So through the chair, I believe that that is one of the potential outcomes of the engagement plan. Are you suggesting that we do that ahead of the engagement? Sorry,
That's correct. That's correct. Just like as you said, staff are at the will of council. But one of the alternative options, as it's been discussed by some, is the outright removal and then engage in public dialogue. And I'm just trying to put another narrative and saying, as one of those options, outcomes, why don't we accelerate the adding of a additional art piece from a Indigenous artist that could further, stimulate and support that dialogue that we do, engagement that we want to take place.
Yeah, so if that is the direction of council and council directs staff to do that, then that would be something that we could do before, as part of the process.
Because this is something that may have been a recommendation coming out of the full consultation. Do we have some additional information on that potential related to how easy would it be? Have we already seeked out input, from some artist groups? Yeah.
We have not engaged in that process yet because it is, we haven't even received council direction to move forward on this project. So there's been, the research that has been done is really focused on what the options are, what other communities have done. So we haven't reached out directly to any any artists, but it would take time to commission and then produce something. When I did speak to Arts and Culture, they said it typically takes about 2 years to commission new art for the city of Kitchener.
Do you think it's it wouldn't be fully servicing or serving or appropriate to accelerate that timeline, something quicker?
I mean, I suppose it would be possible depending on what the vision is and what, if it is something that was suggested by one of the delegates where paint or, like that, where something, smaller is being added to the statue, I suppose it could be something that could be accelerated, but so if council wants us to put up some time limited public art during the consultation, we could do that if that's the choice.
Okay. Madam Chair, I think we have a reasonable recommendation from staff already before council to move forward with appropriate next steps. If there is a motion put on the table for the removal of the statue, I think what I'm suggesting may be a good compromise in between, and an idea that came from the delegation that we heard from today, that council give direction to staff, and they can quickly report back of what the next steps would be to accelerate a additional art piece or some sort of commemoration that from the Indigenous community that further supports their concerns and their impacts from colonialism, and of course what that statue or what that harm may have been. But I'll see if there's alternative motions put aside from their staff recommendation. But at this point, I think moving forward with the staff recommendation is the right course. Thank you.
Thank you. I just have one question, if I may, before I see if there's around 2 questions. I just want to know, is there any opportunity to tighten up the timelines? It seems like it's going to take a long time to do this engagement. Is there any opportunity to tighten it up to have something by early spring next year and still do meaningful engagement?
So the current timeline, through the chair, the current timeline is, we will have something by spring next year. That's the idea, to have something by March, April of next year. But I will turn this over to Jake to talk a little bit more about the, the reality of doing engagement with Indigenous communities. So, Jake.
Thank you. And through the chair around that question, I think this discussion will be a little deeper than just the statue. This will be one that's, founded on reconciliation and a principle of patience. As I'd mentioned previously in staff discussions, time is what's needed in this discussion. Just given hearing some of the delegations and those points, education takes a bit of time as well, as far as historics. And what we don't want to see this happening is a position of my history is more correct than your history. The question in this discussion is talking about reconciliation, and how do you reconcile years and years of mistrust and years of colonial systems, getting to the point of where things need to be at the end of the discussion and providing that safety in that safe environment to have that good type of discussion is what's needed. Gives people a chance to reflect over that time as well. In a year's time, that's the benefit of this type of engagement. People have very strong perspectives on history, very strong and ties to their culture and what they grew up with. And this opportunity, this engagement provides that opportunity for a good discussion to happen. And I think the year's length should be enough time for this type of discussion to happen. And I think we heard a little bit of that as well through a delegation in the Wilmot experience, that they're still continuing on with their discussion. So that's hopefully I've given you some clarity on the length of the process. Thank you.
Yeah, you have. Thank you for that perspective. I appreciate that very much. Okay, next is Councillor Chapman. Do you have more questions?
Yeah, I have a question for Jake to begin with, and that is, in one of the delegations spoke about the, once the statue is removed, that allowed for greater discussion and healing by those members of the community that have been impacted by, in that case, the statue in Wilmot. So do you not see that by removing the statue here during that process would potentially allow for a better engagement process?
Through the chair, what I've learned over the years in any type of engagement or consultation is that a caution not to be is to listen to everybody, as many people as you can. And in this time period, I think you'll hear from many people, many perspectives. And if that's where things go from the majority of discussion, or those people that come up and feel safe and feel that they can trust this process and say, this is part of our recommendation, our solution, our decision, to get to that point. I think there needs to be that time for that discussion before an action like this occurs. To give you an example, in our community, in the territory I'm from, we welcome, when it comes to this type of fueled or really intense discussion matter, we take our time to listen to everybody, and in that we come to a consensus that if that is the decision, if that is the recommendation, if that is the solution to remove the statue, or the solution to keep the statue and have art, or any other that comes out in that period of discussion, then that would be the recommendation coming to council. So that would be my response to your question, and I hope that's clear. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. But I just want a clarification on what you mean by consensus. Like, it seems to me that we're not going to have a consensus here, right?
My example, through the chair, my example was linked to how we deal with things in our territory. I'm a visitor to the territory that I happen to hold a position with in the city of Kitchener, the territory of the Six Nations of the Grand River, the territory of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Anishinaabe, Mississauga to the Credit, the Neutral. So I really am proposing and giving you an example of how we do things that may be done a little differently, and just hearing some of the comments, not only from the delegation, but even from the esteemed council here, is that balance, I think, is the key. Time is also a key to having a very good discussion about this. And once we get to that, I think people will feel empowered and feel like they own or part of that meaningful discussion. And I always caution in my humble suggestion and recommendations is not to be too prescriptive at the start of things. And some may see this as a prescriptive move. And again, just from my own experience in our territory, we don't act right away. We have a very good discussion, however long that takes. So again, that's hopefully that provides a little more clarity. Thank you.
I know, I really appreciate it. Okay, I'll comment, make some comments later. Thank you.
Madam Chair, your mic is off.
Thank you. I was just saying that I wanted to, before I turn to Councillor Gazzola and yourself, Councillor Singh, that we're at a 2 o'clock time check and we have 2 more delegations. So I just leave you with that context, and we've got a busy afternoon ahead of us. So Councillor Gazzola, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to start out by moving the staff recommendation that's in front of us. And I did also have one, excuse me, minor question that I would like to ask, but I do want to move what's in front of us.
Okay, go ahead with your question.
Now, the question, often when we look at situations, regardless of their importance, to do nothing is always somewhat considered. Is that a consideration in this discussion?
So through the chair, if that is council's direction and that's the direction that we receive, then I suppose it is.
No, I guess, Aaron, I'm asking that of you. You didn't consider that, and you would, if you had your druthers, you wouldn't consider that as one of the options.
Yeah, that's not an option that staff is recommending at this time.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. Thank you. So thank you.
Okay, Councillor Singh.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I'll try to be quick, and just on a reflection on what Jake said in his last comment, that it's appropriate for us to have balance, while at the same time it's especially important for us to take time to hear all the voices. I think because of the time that's required, and we don't want to negate the voices that came forward today and many more that do resonate in the community, that they do expect and demand more immediate action, that perhaps we can show good sign of good faith as we move forward with dialogue, but also encourage for that additional idea of having perhaps some sort of art piece that commemorates, of course, the Indigenous community, at the same time, the harms that have been made by colonialism, that can further educate, inform our general populace, and I think better encourage good dialogue on both sides and try to create that balanced approach. So I just want to add an amendment to the motion that's been moved by Councillor Gazzola, that staff be directed to reach out to the Indigenous community and artists to see how we can accelerate some sort of commemoration or art piece alongside the Queen Victoria statue. And staff can report back later, if not in the next council meeting in August, how quickly we can move forward with that initiative.
Okay, thank you. Up next is Councillor Marsh.
Yeah, thanks. I have a different direction I want us to go in, actually. Based on the delegations that we've had today, I want to move an amendment to staff's recommendation as well. And that is just that we, sorry, it's not in front of me. I thought it was going to be moved by someone else, and so I wasn't prepared with it here. Let's see here. So that staff be directed to immediately remove the Queen Victoria statue from the plinth and move it to a private location during the time that staff are engaging in the engagement process.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, Chair Galloway Seelock. I was just wondering if Councillor Singh's motion could incorporate, if you can't commission an art piece in time, whether or not we could erect some existing artwork that we may have, or for some other private organized group that may have some art that for the temporary time until such a case that we can get a permanent one or one that's more suitable. I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah, Councillor Ioannidis, my motion is the essence of it is expediency, that it needs to be much sooner than later. So whatever that the appropriate art piece may be, where it comes from, if it's something that's newly made, doesn't matter. I think staff can take the necessary work, but I agree with you. I think time is important, so it needs to happen at the earliest.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Verbanovic?
Thanks. I guess two things, Councillor Singh, questions. Number one, are you suggesting that the artwork that you're talking about would potentially be temporary artwork until the process is completed, and then, you know, part of the process would explore whether something different on a permanent basis would be put in place? Maybe this could be part of that, or some other solution. In other words, you're not presupposing what ultimately might come out of the consultation. Is that correct?
No, not at all, Mr. Mayor. As staff have said, the commissioning of an appropriate project, if that is a recommendation that comes from the consultation, would be a lengthier time, could take upwards to a year, 2 years. So as I said to Councillor Ioannidis, timing is key. We want to make sure that to provide a balanced opinion on the right course as we put forward this dialogue and engagement, having something sooner would be required. So something temporary, I think, is appropriate for the time being. And that could help inform what would be that something more permanent down the road.
And could we, would it be reasonable to sort of, consider your amendment in principle today and ask staff to bring back some initial reflections on it on the 20th when we deal with the motion in its final form on the 20th?
Mr. Mayor, I think we need to send a strong message. That's my assessment. I think staff can help to add some additional context to what the amendment is if it passes for that council day. But I think we need to simply give a clear answer if that's a helpful step forward along with the staff recommendation rather than us saying it's in principle. That's my position anyway. But I appreciate what you're saying.
Thanks for those clarifications.
Councillor Marsh.
I have no more questions. I just have comment at the right time, Madam Chair.
Okay. I do just want to ask the clerk before we go to comments how I'm to deal with this. We have the staff recommendation that's moved, and then I have two amendments, which are competing amendments. Do I go with the first amendment that came in first and then the second amendment after that?
Through the chair.
Point of clarification, Chair Galloway Seelock. I think Councillor Marsh's motion would be contrary rather than an amendment.
Okay, well, let's get the answer from the clerk first.
Through the chair, the staff recommendation refers to the statue being located within the park. So if Councillor Marsh would like the statue to be removed, the intention of the staff recommendation is that the statue would still remain in the park. So we need to determine whether or not that amendment is germane. If that's the case, we would deal with Councillor Marsh's amendment first, and then we would deal with Councillor Singh's. But the removal of the statue, the staff recommendation indicates that the statue will remain in the park. So to remove it would be contrary to what the motion that's on the floor.
So I would then deal with Councillor Singh's amendment first, then the staff recommendation. If that all failed, then we would go to Councillor Marsh's.
That is correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, we'll now move to comment. And again, I just implore everybody, it's almost 10 after 2 and we have 2 more delegations that we have to get through. So up first I have Mayor Verbanovic.
Oh, sorry, that was from before. I will comment, but I'll wait.
Okay. Councillor Marsh?
I want to start by thanking our delegates that have made time to come to a daytime meeting, and with their eloquent words shared with us their passionate perspectives. Cheyenne Thorpe, Amy Smoke, Shafaza Ishmael, Angie Hallman, David Alton, Samantha Estuesta, Melissa Bowman, Caleb DeGroot Majetti, and Justin Burr in particular, all of those people in particular. I just want to say that I think ultimately, when we hear from that so many people are experiencing harm and trauma from the fact that we have a huge, very tall statue of the Queen Victoria, in our primary park in the downtown core area. When we hear that there's harm being done every time they see it, or every time just knowing that it's there, I think that that's significant. I think that our process, and as was pointed out earlier, we are actually a product of colonialism. We as a council, we are in a colonialist structure, and just even the way that we have these formal meetings with our councillor title, that's what people call us, with such dignity and respect, Councillor Sarah Marsh, whereas sometimes we trying to be familiar, we call our delegates and sometimes even staff members by their first names, which I struggle with, because yes, we do want to be real. We want to be real. We are just real people in the community. After all, I'm just Sarah, but I think that the power imbalance that's just inherent in the way that we conduct our meetings and the way that that we make our decisions, we do need to question that. It's a statute. We're not going to complete reconciliation by keeping it there or by removing it there. But it is very important to me that as a council, we don't make decisions that are fear-based. What will happen if we remove it? So many people are going to come out and call it into question. That could happen, but at the same time, we've been down this road before as a council. We have been a part of making decisions that did cause additional harm to people in the past, and we are working on doing better. And I'm so proud of our council for what we have done so far towards reconciliation, and that's why we have Jake here today as our I just did it. Mr. Linkletter here today as our one of our advisors, and so this is not an easy decision, but it is not one that I think we should just go along with and say, oh yeah, well, we're just going to keep it up there without really pausing to consider what we've heard today. So I would implore my colleagues to consider not necessarily removing it forever without full dialogue and full consultation, but removing it for now, in putting it in a safe spot, and then conducting the dialogue in earnest. That's what I think can happen, and I think that we can stand behind that decision. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Up next is Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, first I too would like to thank the delegations for coming and speaking to us today. And I think it's really important as we think through this process and make a decision here today that we take seriously the comments that we're hearing about harm and trauma that is being caused in the community by this statue that we're talking about. I really want to thank Councillor Marsh for bringing forward the motion to immediately remove the statue. I fully support it. I feel I was a bit timid off the mark on this one because I don't know where the rest of council sits on this. And I think Councillor Marsh, you did a wonderful job of expressing yourself and telling us the importance of removing the statue so as not to cause further harm. I don't support the statue at all. I appreciate staff's recommendation to do a full consultation, but by removing the statue now, I do think that it would give people the opportunity to speak more openly about the impact that it has on their lives. And I think that, you know, if following the consultation, if the agreement is that it should remain, it can be brought back. But I think that it would be the right thing to do for, you know, to show that that people's voices are being heard. And to me, it's not about numbers. It's not about if we had another 20 people speak to us in favor of removing the statue, then therefore we could do it. I think it's simply the fact that we've got a serious issue on our hands, and a way to move forward would be to remove the statue and to continue the discussion and the engagement after that. So I fully support Councillor Marsh's proposal.
Thank you for your comments. Up next is Councillor Gazzola.
I'm not ready for my comments. The reason I had my hand up is that I don't totally understand Councillor Singh's amendment. Are you amending it that while this process goes on, the statue remain and there'd also be a piece of artwork put there? Are you also recommending that the statue be removed? I'm not clear on what your amendment is.
No, Councillor Gazzola, that would be Councillor Marsh's motion for the removal of the statue. I'm saying that I would support the staff recommendation that the statue remains while we engage with public discussion on the next steps. I really appreciated Mr. Linklater's comment regarding taking time while also ensuring that there's a balance. And my motion regarding a art piece adjacent to the statue while the statue remains as public engagement is taking place will help to further educate and further spur that discussion. So it would be adjacent to the statue for the time being, and it would be something at the quickest, whichever means that may be, with consultation with the Indigenous community and with our EDI committee.
Thank you. That clarifies what I didn't understand. Thank you.
Are you making any comments, Councillor Gazzola?
Yes, but could you give me a couple of seconds?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, Chair Galloway Seelock. First of all, I just want to start off by thanking all the delegates for coming in, and I share the same comments that Councillor Schneider. There were some really thought-provoking comments that came out of the delegations today. The other thing is I want to thank staff for the report and staff's report for in honoring our democratic process that we have here in our community, and I really thank Councillor Singh for bringing forward his amendment to basically show both sides of the story. And I don't think anyone here on council is wanting to cause anyone harm or anything. we're always in a leadership role. It's never easy to make decisions. Some decisions may not please others, and some decisions may please a lot. And the fact that it may not be numbers, as some members may suggest, I think that's not accurate. I think it's all about numbers for many things. And just, I think this is a really good compromise moving forward, because I know myself, I have heard back from many residents already that are somewhat in opposition of the removal of the statue, but myself, I'm not very clear on where I want to stand on this until I actually hear more from everyone about it. And I think that's why we're going through this consultation process. I don't want to be misinformed and make a decision based on not having the full range of discussion or all the information that's available. And so I'm supporting the motion that's put forward by Councillor Gazzola and am supporting the amendment by Councillor Singh.
Okay, up next is Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Chair Galloway Seelock. I won't repeat a lot of what's been said. It's been all very heartfelt. The delegations today were incredible, deeply appreciated, and I really want to thank each and every one for the time they gave in presenting and in researching their notes today. It was incredible. Also want to thank Ms. Morlag Silk and Mr. Linklater and our entire Equity, Andrew Reyes, and Indigenous Initiatives team for the work that's gone into this. Want to get this right. I really believe in the power of the engagement and the discussions, as we've learned in some of our anti-racism and Indigenous training, that, you know, discussions lead to education. Education leads to understanding. Understanding leads to acceptance and the conciliation. I really am happy with what Councillor Singh has brought forth, because it is a compromise, and I'm a big believer in the power of art. And I really believe that the artwork that would go up, if approved, would also show support and also help educate and move and inspire. So I look forward to this process. I wish it could be done sooner, but it's better to do it right, as our staff have said. And I look forward to really moving forward and to healing and what it will bring to this community. Thanks.
Thank you. Up next is Councillor Gazzola.
Yes, thank you. There's a lot before us today. If someone were to ask my opinion 5 years ago on this sort of thing, it would be totally different than it is today. And I'm finding as the days go by, my opinions are starting to go back and forth. It's difficult. Anyhow, I'm going to ask that all of those that be taken today be recorded. On the vote of moving the statue for the time being, I will not support them. I can support Councillor Singh's compromise, temporary compromise. I think there's only good can come from that. I will not support the recommendation that I moved. I think the staff recommendation is very good. It will, I think it will accomplish what we're trying to accomplish. I totally believe in public engagement. I've always pushed for public engagement. I get somewhat concerned in that it's not equal public engagement, but the fact is that it is public engagement, and both sides, and I think there's more than one side on this issue, both sides will have an opportunity to come and discuss it. And as far as the second The second part of the recommendation, education. We can never have enough education. So although I won't support it, although I won't vote for it, I do support those things. I do not like, the reason I don't want to support it, I do not like unanimous votes, because with unanimous votes, things just seem to go totally in one direction. And if there is any objection, the objection is lost. And so that's why I won't support it. But I will do what I should as a counselor to support what staff are trying to do and what we need to do. But there are a lot of questions to be answered, and there are two sides. Reconciliation is not a one-way street. We need to move forward. We need to move forward. We can't keep looking backwards. I know that's not what the gist of this discussion is, but we're only going to win by moving forward. So that's my position, and thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Up next is Councillor Michaud.
Thank you, Councillor Galloway. I first want to thank the delegates for coming out and sharing their stories. And I want to commend you for the work you've done thus far. And I know that it's a long road ahead, and I know that you're not going to give up. And I think that's showing the strength of and courage of your position. I also agree with Councillor Singh and support his, I guess it's a motion or suggestion that we bring in, the artwork with the statue and leave it as it is for now, because I think there's still more dialogue to be done. Staff are doing a great job, and there's a lot more work to be done on that end. So I think hopefully with staff, the community, and the delegates here today, we can come up with a solution where it is going to work for everyone. It's not just one way or the other. Thank you for coming out.
Thank you. Up next is Mayor Verbenovich.
Thanks very much, Chair Galloway Seelock, and I want to begin by thanking all of the delegations that took the time to come in today to share their views with us, to share their views in writing or by video, and who have done that both today and in recent weeks on this issue. And I think, as we all know, there certainly has been a range of viewpoints that we've heard. I also want to thank staff for the work that they've done on this, and bringing forward what I think is a very thoughtful report that really looks to engage the broader community with an equity lens, in order to deal with what is a very complex issue. And I think I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the fact that we are fortunate. And I think Councillor Gazzola, you indicated earlier, and I want to thank you for bringing forward the motion, and Councillor Singh for your amendment. That we are fortunate to live in a democratic society where we can have these discussions and debates, a society that's built on a parliamentary democracy system and a constitutional monarchy. That's the system we have as a country now, and I know there are some who maybe feel that the time has come for a change for that, but that's a different discussion for a different day and a broader debate for those who want to have it. But, I think we'd also be remiss if we didn't acknowledge that for the first time in the history of this country, the representative of our head of state, in fact, is an Indigenous person in Inuk, Mary Simon, who, as you know, is our Governor General. I've reflected on all of the comments, and really, for me, what's compelling here is how do we ensure that education takes place? How do we ensure that there's meaningful dialogue, and how do we work towards, and Mr. Linklater's comments to me about about the experience that he brings to us from traditional lands was very powerful for me. How do we look to ensure that everyone has the opportunity to be heard and work towards a solution that while it may not be a consensus when this process is done, but maybe it will be, and let's work towards that as a community, and that for me was very powerful, and hence why I will support the recommendation from staff with the amendment, acknowledging that I think it is important that we get some additional input from staff in relation to the amendment for council on the excuse me, on the 20th. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That appears to be all the comments. So a recorded vote's been called. We'll start with, I believe we said we would start with Councillor Singh's amendment. So I'll start with Ward 1, Councillor Davey.
In support.
Councillor Schneider.
In support.
Councillor Gazzola.
In support.
Councillor Michaud.
In support.
Councillor Singh.
In support.
Councillor Ioannidis.
In support.
Councillor Chapman.
Just a question. If I support this, does that mean I'm automatically supporting the staff motion? No, the staff report. Okay, I support it.
Councillor Marsh.
Opposed.
Mayor Rabinovich.
Sorry, support.
And I'm in support. So that passes. Up next, we move to the staff recommendation as moved by Councillor Gazzola. We'll start with Councillor Marsh.
Opposed.
Councillor Chapman.
Opposed.
Councillor Ioannidis.
In favor.
Councillor Singh.
In support.
Councillor Michaud.
In favor.
Councillor Gazzola.
In favor.
Councillor Schneider.
In favor.
Councillor Davey.
Opposed.
Mayor Rabinovich.
In favor.
And I'm in favor. So I just checked to the clerk now. Do I need to, because it's passed, I don't need to go to Councillor Marsh's motion. Is that correct? Or do I still need to have a vote on that?
That's correct. The staff recommendation has passed. It was only if it lost.
Okay. So we have finished that item. There's no more votes that are needed to be taken, right?
There are not.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for your discussion and time on this. I think it's, you know what, I think that we just need to continue to move forward, and we'll move on to our next item. We have two delegations. Mayor Rabinovich, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think through as we work through the balance of the day, because the thinking originally was that regardless of where we were, we would end this meeting at 2:30, potentially deal with the ROP, and then move into the other committee at 4. I'm cognizant that this is still going to take some time, and we may. I'm just wondering if staff can comment. If we didn't deal with the ROP today, I'm looking at Monday. Would that still allow us to inform the regional process ahead of their report coming out? I'm just trying to balance times here, Chair Galloway-Seelock.
No, I get it. Yeah,
Mr.
we
Chapman,
need to figure something out.
Can you help in that regards? Like right now, I'm looking at, I think there's a hydro board meeting that I know involves some members of council until 10. Finance doesn't start till 11. We could potentially work it that we do finance in between, like we do the special council for the ROP between 10 and 11.
So through you, Madam Chair, my understanding is that the region's report is due to go to committee on the 22nd and will be published on the 15th. So technically your comments will be received by the region if tabled on the 13th prior to the report being published. But at that point, it's a day before. And so, it's questionable how much it would actually influence the recommendation, but certainly would be on record before they publish their report. So I would suggest that yes, if you do want to have input, it will be at the 11th hour, but presumably there would still be time for the region to consider it before the ink dries on their report.
Okay.
The other option procedurally I would offer is that you may wish to consider hearing the two delegations, and if council was inclined to adopt the recommendation without discussion, to deal with that today. But if there was a desire to have discussion, comment, and debate, to refer the matter to your council meeting and deal with the motion at that point in time. To free up, if you wanted today to still have some time.
But I'm also just cognizant we're losing folks at different points, and the ROP is a pretty important issue that I think we need to have all of council at. Sorry, Councillor Singh has his hand up. Councillor Galloway-Seelock, do you want to ask him if he can speak?
Sure, go ahead, Councillor Singh.
No, I just wanted to support what Mayor Vivanovic is saying. At the same time, with the suggestion, perhaps we just hear the delegations and then quickly see if we can come to some sort of agreement. I don't necessarily support that. I think we need to have a fulsome conversation. I think it would be appropriate in the sense of the 13th being the 11th hour. I think we may even be able to learn more so what the region is inclining towards of their final recommendation. And at the end of the day, it's regional council that needs to hear the input of the lower tier municipalities. And I think the input that we put forward on Monday can still help to inform them to make the right decision. So I would support the Monday meeting.
Okay, and I think the other point is that we will also have an opportunity on the 20th to deal with it after the region's report is released. And whatever this option 5 looks like to comment.
Councillor Marsh.
Yeah, but we know that staff reports are written days in advance of them being published. And we know that we, as the largest municipality within the region, should have a certain amount of influence. We're not hearing any delegates on this topic, as far as I understand it. I thought that the delegates are regarding the next topic on finance. Isn't that correct, Madam Chair?
Sorry,
Who are the delegates for?
We have
topic?
two. We have two for the no conversion practices policy investigation report back.
And is that a time crunch also?
I don't believe that one is a time crunch, but we need to hear the delegation. They've been sitting here for 2.5 hours.
Yeah, I get that. So I would propose that we have the ROP discussion after hearing the delegates. That's my suggestion.
Diana,
Okay.
you wanted to say, hold on one second. Diana, you wanted to say something?
Hi, through the chair, I just wanted to let you know that Sam Nabby, who had waited at the last ROP meeting, was invited to attend, and he is also in attendance today because he didn't get the opportunity to delegate at the ROP meeting. So he is your only delegate for ROP this afternoon, and he has already joined the meeting today.
Yeah, I'm just concerned because I know, as I said, some folks need to leave, and I don't want to be missing people on an item that important. Well, let's proceed, Chair Galloway-Seelock. At the very least, we should hear Sam Nabby today, and then we can decide if we proceed today or deal with it on the 13th.
Okay. In light of that, I still would like staff to be able to make their presentation, the 5-minute presentation. So Ellen, if you're ready to make your next presentation, you can go ahead.
So I can, thank you so much, Councillor Galloway-Seelock. I can keep this very short. This report that has come forward is a follow-up to the motion that was passed at council back in the fall of 2021, where council further directed staff to continue to monitor legislative developments at the federal or provincial level, focused on the banning of conversion therapy within Canada, and then to report back to council with any further legislated or policy actions that could be contemplated by the municipality to further prohibit conversion practices. And so thank you for still allowing this motion or this report to go forward, because since it is Pride Month, I just wanted to make a statement that this is exactly the kind of things that municipalities can do to support 2S LGBTQ communities. It's Pride Month. And here, this is an example of how we can actually move forward with action by stating it in our policies and making recommendations in our policies and criteria within the City of Kitchener to stand with the 2S LGBT community and to take action against things that harm that community. So I don't think I need to go into any detail with the report. There's just a series of policy recommendations that are very much in alignment with what was represented by the no conversion therapy or no conversion practices group when they came back in the fall. And so I'll just leave it at that, and I'll turn it over to the delegates.
Thank you very much. Councillor Chapman, is it a question of staff or process or?
Yeah, I just wanted to move it and ask for a recorded vote.
Okay. Okay, let's move to the delegation then. Our first delegation is Robert. Oh, I can't hear you. I think you're still on mute.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. To begin, I would like to thank Kitchener Council and this committee for the opportunity to speak regarding the practical application of the motion denouncing conversion practices, which was adopted by Kitchener Council in November 2021. As you are aware, this motion states that conversion practices are dangerous and harmful, perpetuating myths and stereotypes about sexual orientation and gender identity and expression. I can personally attest to this harm, having undergone several forms of conversion practices in Waterloo Region between 1987 and 1996. During those years, I attended a conservative religious college in Kitchener, which engaged in informal conversion practices to coerce students to conform to heterosexual ideas. As a result of this pressure, I ended up attending a regular group and individual counseling sessions that were administered by an organization affiliated with the now defunct Exodus International, which was a global umbrella organization for groups promoting conversion practices. In these sessions, same-sex attraction was equated with addiction, and models of addiction treatment were applied in an attempt to snuff out same-sex attraction. I experienced a great deal of depression throughout this time, including thoughts of suicide. Out of desperation, I twice attended week-long retreats at a center in Baden. Though purporting to guide participants through a process of psychological healing, these sessions continued to dredge up both real and imagined shames and traumas from the past. The retreat leaders concluded that my same-sex attractions were caused by demons and attempted to cast them out during long periods of loud prayer while I was subjected to being shaken, pushed, and ordered to vomit up the evil spirit. As a final effort to avoid college suspension, I participated in a 6-month-long discipleship program that was based in Cambridge, Ontario. This was yet another isolated community that had a campus of several acres, which students were discouraged from leaving, even during free time. Visitors were also limited. The same kinds of methods and teachings I'd undergone previously were used here as well. In some cases, the curriculum was identical to that used at the retreat center I had attended. In the late 90s, I finally came to the conclusion that my sexuality was never going to change. I began to accept myself and eventually came out. Coming out and accepting myself did not, however, extinguish the ongoing effects of 15 years of conversion practices. I grieve the years, financial resources, and opportunities wasted pursuing healing when I was never broken. It also angers me that this supposed therapy has left me wounded. I've struggled with bouts of depression and anxiety as a result. Social anxiety in particular has had a limiting effect on aspects of my life, both personal and occupational, making it difficult for me to feel connected with and trusting of others. Religious-based trauma also eroded my sense of autonomy and decision-making skills, and self-trust takes a lot of work. Additionally, these experiences contributed to my development of complex PTSD, which I'm currently dealing with through therapy. As a survivor of conversion practices, I fully support the policy amendments recommended by the No Conversion Practices Policy Investigation Report. In the absence of a bylaw fully prohibiting conversion practices, these amendments represent vital first steps in the application of the motion Kitchener Council has proposed or has passed. These steps demonstrate how seriously the City of Kitchener views the negative impact of these sham therapies and will help to deter their promotion in our community. They also communicate a strong message of affirmation and inclusion to survivors of conversion practices and to those young people who may currently be at risk of being subjected to these dehumanizing experiences. Thank you again for this opportunity, for your time and your consideration of my perspective.
Thank you very much, Robert, for your presentation and for waiting forever for us today. That is much appreciated. There appears to be a question for you, Councillor Chapman.
More than a question, it's a comment. I just want to thank you so much for coming and for the work that you and your group have done to bring us this far. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again for coming today. It's much appreciated. We're going to move on to our next delegation, and our next delegation is Holly.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
Yeah, so my name is Holly Ardelian. I identify as female and I use she, her pronouns. I'm already emotional. This is great. I'm basically just here to give you like a face to what's going on, just like Robert managed to do. I grew up in a very homophobic family. In fact, I didn't even know that gay people really existed until I went to high school because I was homeschooled my whole life. So I just remember being in my locker and two girls came up and kissed each other. And I was like, this is possible. Like, this is something that people do. And it was like in the next week, I was like, oh, this makes sense. My whole life, I've been living this like cookie cutter box, and I'm not that person. So before my family found out, I was about 14, and basically I had figured out that if I tell them, they're going to kick me out. And just that happened. I was 14, and I lived on the streets of downtown Kitchener. If you remember that, if you remember that big, like, kind of castle building on Queen Street, I lived in there. So this was this moment in life where I was like, I don't know what to do. No one's around me. No one's giving me a chance. And so I tried to get back in relationship with my family and was able to. And they sent me to a place in the States with a bunch of other women. So basically this place was to change you, brainwash you, whatever they wanted to call it. They had crazy punishments like, well, first of all, upon arriving there, you're not allowed to touch people. So you can't high five, hug, support people who are also in the program. If you say something that they don't like, you can't talk for the next certain amount of hours. If you do something else, they have something called a sweet out, where you're not allowed to eat anything sweet, whether that's fruit, or bagels, you know, anything like that. And one girl, while I was there, they told her she was going so far down the wrong path that she was going to die. And they made her dig her own grave in their backyard. This is not something that just hurts people. It is something that traumatizes them. So this place kicked me out because I touched somebody, and apparently that made me a little bit of a liability. After this, I went to several recovery groups, 3 of them here in the Waterloo region. Everyone gave me the books to read on how to get straight. My parents told me that if I was just good enough, if I just read my Bible and I talked to God, you know, that was going to be really, I wouldn't be who I am today. I also was forced to go to counseling with counselors who implemented different coping mechanisms that I was supposed to use that week. And we, as Kitchener, we can't let this happen here. This is not something that we should be opening up for our queer community, for our trans community, for anybody who falls under our pride rainbow. This is not something that we should be able to have in a city that we would like to call home, because this doesn't make a city for people who call home. This is not that for them, because they would have to leave in order to try to heal from their trauma. So what I'm saying to you as a person who has gone through a lot of crap, I'm just asking you, so we can get to the next step. I'm asking you to push forward with me and with Robert and with all of us who are going through this, even now. Anything that we can do is a deterrent, anything. And we need to make this harder for people to do so that we can start closing the door to trauma in our community, and trauma for our gay community, and trauma for the people who have to hold us and bring us along with them. So I would just thank you for hearing me, and I really appreciate whatever you can do to help us. That's everything.
Thank you, Holly, for sharing your experiences with us. It's very moving, and I appreciate so much you coming forward with your story today. Thank you. So now we can move on. I think we're going to deal with this issue. I think it's important for us to deal with it now. It's been moved by Councillor Chapman. Is there any questions or comments? Councillor Marsh.
No, I fully support it. I was going to call the question. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks staff for all the work that they've put in to come this far. I realize there's still more work that can be done as moving into the future, but I think this is great. And so I thank the delegations and the community for all the work they've also put into this, and it exposes people, right? So, and it takes a lot of courage. So I'm really pleased with where we're at right now. So thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Verbenrich.
Yes, just very, very briefly. I want to thank certainly Robert and Holly for coming in today, as well as the delegations that previously came in and really shared with us the pain that comes from this horrific practice. And without a question, it's unfathomable, quite frankly, that in today's day and age we're still dealing with this. I want to thank Councillor Chapman for bringing forward this when originally approached by some community members with respect to the issue, and for staff for the work that's been done on the report. I wholeheartedly will support the recommendation before us as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gazzola.
I just want to totally support the recommendation that's before us. And I really want to compliment the two individuals who came forward and really spoke about lived experiences. That is really remarkable, and thank you for doing that. So thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Okay, recorded vote's been called. We'll start with Councillor Davey,
In favor.
Councillor Schneider,
In favor.
Councillor Gazzola,
In favor.
Councillor Michaud,
In favor?
Councillor Singh,
In favor?
Councillor Ioannidis,
In favor?
Councillor Chapman,
In favor?
Councillor Marsh,
In favor.
Mayor Verbanovich,
Sorry, in favor.
and I'm in favor, so that passes unanimously. Thank you very much, everyone, and thanks to staff for all the work on this. With that, I think we just need a deferral motion for the vacant home tax. Dan, did you want us to move it to the council meeting or to the August meeting, or just leave it with staff when it best fits to come back?
That's in council's hands. Our recommendation would be to defer it to the first council cycle, or sorry, committee cycle after the summer recess. So that I believe is the August committee meeting. And that we've got a committee and a council discussion on the issue.
Okay, that sounds good. Councillor Davey?
No, I'm just going to move that.
Okay, so that's been moved, the deferral. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And I think that completes finance and corporate services today. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, we will then move into special council. Do folks need a 5-minute bathroom break, or? Okay, we'll take a 5-minute bathroom break then, and we'll start again at 3.
Sorry, if the clerks can hear me, is my mic working now or?
It is, Paul.
Through you, Mr. Chair.
Sarah, can you hear my sound?
Yes, I can.
Hello?
Yeah, Paul, we can hear you.
Hello, hello, hello.
Paul, we can hear you.
Perfect, thank you. Somehow I fixed my sound problem on my computer. Thanks.
Okay, folks, 1 minute warning, please. I can ask folks to turn their camera on. Okay. So, sorry, just give me 1 second. Just realized I have a different script for this. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We'll get going. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the special council meeting on June the 8th. This afternoon, we're gathering on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. We're recognizing our responsibility to serve as stewards for the land and honor the original caretakers who came before us. Our community is enriched by the enduring knowledge and deep-rooted traditions of the diverse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit in Kitchener today. Council will recall that this meeting was deferred from this item was deferred from our last meeting. Since then, we've had a number of written submissions. And those written submissions include Sally Guns, Shane Mulligan, Paul Britton, Don Parker, Jonathan Roger, Kai Reimer Watts, and Gail Schenk.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I don't mean to interrupt, but there was one additional written submission that was just sent out about 6 or 7 minutes ago
Okay.
from 2163846 Ontario Inc. or Brent Haven. So members of council should have possibly received that as well.
Okay, thank you for that. So I think at this point, I'm going to start with Mr. Donegani's presentation. Then we'll go to our delegation. We have one delegation, Mr. Sam Nabby, who, as you recall, wasn't able to stay until we got to this item last time. And so he was invited back today. Mr. Chapman is in the midst of conferring with the region to confirm whether or not we could potentially deal with this on the 13th. And so that we're not rushed and everyone's participating today. And then and still have that considered in the regional report. So we'll go to Mr. Chapman after we hear from Mr. Nabby. So with that, we will start off with Mr. Donegani.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So as you recall, on May 30th, Council was presented some highlights for Kitchener of 3 land needs assessment growth options to guide growth across the region to 2051. Council deferred consideration of that item to await additional information on a regionally preferred land needs assessment approach. That information is not available today. We expect it to be available on June 15th. Nevertheless, staff feel it would be valuable for Council to pass a motion today to provide clarity to the region on what Kitchener's priorities are, so that these can be considered in forming a regional staff recommended growth approach. It would also provide city staff with clear direction on how to advocate for Kitchener's interests as we move through the process. Regardless, we intend to return to Council on June 20th with information on the regional staff recommended growth approach and provide Council an opportunity to endorse a growth option. In the report that's before you today, staff have synthesized what we heard last August, as well as discussions and draft motions that were considered in May 30th into a set of priorities for Council, with the hope that it will help frame any Council resolution today. Those priorities that we heard were to protect farmland and the countryside line, to provide ample and diverse housing opportunities, to address growth, and to address affordable housing needs. Emphasize an intensification first approach to growth, planning for complete and walkable communities, real climate action, financial sustainability and prosperity. And although it hasn't been unanimous among councils, we've heard from some that there is a desire that if there were to be community area expansions across the region, that it should be directed towards the cities. And 2 points around that, infrastructure implication in Kitchener should be well understood before those lands are added to the growth, urban growth area. And also that if there's growth to be allocated in Woolwich, it shouldn't presume that servicing is available in Kitchener, that we'll need to take care of our own growth and intensification needs first before serving other communities. That concludes my presentation. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions of Mr. Donegani or staff's reports? Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, I just have you mentioned urban growth areas. Are you talking about the DGA?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, new designated greenfield area would be new urban or growth areas.
Okay, it's just there's so many terms in there. You know, I just try to, there's the urban boundary, the community area, the countryside line. So I just wanted to make sure that we were talking about the DGA. Thank you.
Other questions of Mr. Donegani? Okay, if not, then we'll move on to our delegations. And just bear with me. I don't welcome Mr. Nabby. My script is missing the normal prelude that comes, but you've been a delegation enough times that I don't think I need to go through it. You do have 5 minutes to make your presentation, so go ahead. Welcome, Sam. Oh, you're frozen.
Members of council.
Sam, you're really breaking up. Do you want to maybe turn off your video and see if that helps? You're muted now again.
All right. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you so much.
Okay. I'll just keep it audio then. I'm not sure if I'm able to share my screen. A question to clerks for that, but if not, I can just give my presentation orally.
I believe you would have had to have submitted it to clerks, but does clerks have that presentation?
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, we do not.
Okay, so you can certainly forward it afterwards, Sam, and they can make sure that council has an opportunity to see it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for making space for further delegation on this very important topic, and thank you to staff for your report that has come to today's meeting. I really, I think that staff strike a good line of talking about essentially values that the city may advance during this ongoing consultation process. I understand that we don't have all the information, we don't have all the details we might like, and that the region is still working on an option 5, and there's been community input on an option 4. But this conversation is incredibly important for all of us who live in Waterloo Region, but also specifically for the organization I'm here to represent, which is Hold the Line Waterloo Region. So we exist to do community education. And
Sam, we've just lost you.
Line is a very specific part of our regional official plan. Oh goodness, I'm sorry.
No worries.
You're
back. We're hearing you again. If you can just back up a little bit. You're gone now again. Are you there, Sam?
All right. I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay. I will.
Yeah, maybe back up a little bit, and so we can hear your full presentation.
Okay, thank you. So I'm here representing Hold the Line Waterloo Region. Our mandate is around education and advocacy around protecting the countryside line. I had a slide up with all the great commitments that have already been made to protect the countryside line, and that includes this council's commitment back in August 2021, when we first the region first requested comment from the cities on this. We also did a survey in the 2018 municipal election where a number of individual councillors had expressed their will to continue to defend the countryside line. So this line is very important. It's been the other side of the coin of our efforts to intensify the region in order to create more walkable communities, in order to create densities that will support investment in transit like the ION. But when we talk about density, and we're throwing a lot of numbers around during this conversation, there's not often a lot of understanding of what that visually means, what does that number translate to on the ground. And in my presentation that I shared with the region, in which I also have here on my slide, is a great resource from the Canadian Urban Institute that I would suggest anyone involved in this consultation to go and visit, which is visualizingdensity.ca. And it shows visual photos, pictures of neighborhoods in Ontario and their densities and what sort of built form they have. We can see a neighborhood in Oakville with townhouses and laneway housing that achieves 220 people and jobs per hectare. And we can see a neighborhood in the east end of Toronto near Leslieville that achieves 169 people and jobs per hectare with mostly duplexes and semis. So when we talk about density, there are some scare tactics that have been used in these conversations that we're going to need towers everywhere to achieve what we want. And that's just not true. We can achieve the densities we need, and we can accommodate the population that we need to 2051 by not expanding our urban area, as has been shown by options 3 and option 4. And we can do that with a variety of housing choices. It doesn't mean that everyone's going to have to live in an apartment. The other thing to consider about the regional official plan that is being updated is that there have been a number of housing policies advanced that is going to make it a lot easier to achieve the kind of results we want to see. A lot of the frustrations we've seen on the individual project level it being, not a lack of family-sized units in new development, and being able to regulate bedroom size or number of bedrooms in a unit is something that we will be able to do with the new regional official plan. So there are some issues with the way that the land needs assessment was conducted from our perspective, in that it assumes that forms like apartments will continue to be dominated by 1-bedroom units, and that the only family-sized units may be single-family homes. And that doesn't have to be the case. We're not resigned to repeating the same development patterns of the past, and we are getting those tools to make it happen. So we know that there's a lot of support for keeping the countryside line where it is, to protect it. I just wanted to lastly talk about the Southwest Kitchener policy area. We know that that area has not had its countryside line defined, and that this regional official plan is the opportunity to set that boundary. In Kitchener's last meeting on this topic, you heard from a representative of landowners in that area who requested that it be added into the urban area. That's not something that needs to be required, and it's not something that it absolutely must happen. What has been determined by the region and by their process is that there is adequate consideration for protecting our groundwater in those areas. The next step, and what regional staff are working on right now, is what does the detailed mapping look like? Where does that line end up? And how much growth do we need to 2051? And that discussion can happen independently of whether those specific Southwest Kitchener policy area lands are designated urban or not. Even if they are required to be within the countryside line, it does not mean that they will be slated for development in the next 5 years, 10 years. And the regional official plan also allows us to reevaluate every time we have a review, every 5 years, every 10 years, and we can course correct. However, if we assign urban area to places where it was not actually necessary, we can't take that back. So I would urge council to continue to hold fast to your support of the countryside line, and also to recognize that we've been ambitious in our results. We've been more ambitious in our results even than in our expectations for development in this region, and particularly in Kitchener. We've done great with accessory dwellings. We've been building a lot of those. We've done great with density, with building walkable communities. We now have some more tools coming up to really regulate affordability and family unit size. And that's a good thing, and we need those extra tools. But we can do this all, and we can achieve it all without expanding the urban boundary. And that's a scenario that Hold the Line would like to see, is a scenario that does not increase the region's urban boundary. I'll leave it there. Thank you for your time.
No problem. Thank you very much, Sam, for coming in today. And we do have some questions for you. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, hi. Thank you, Sam. Just a question. When you talk about, again, I just want clarification. You're talking about the countryside line, but you're also talking about the urban boundary.
Mm-hmm.
Are you using those interchangeably, or are you referring to just don't expand the countryside line, or are you referring to the DGA area as the urban boundary?
So those are two different things. The urban area boundary, you can think of as if we start from the core and we're spreading outwards. The urban area is what is already currently developed with residential neighborhoods, commercial areas, employment areas, and the like. And then after that, we have the designated greenfield area, which might be currently a farm, it might currently be an unused field, but it is slated for development, and there may be a subdivision plan in place there that will be built soon.
Right.
And
Yeah, no,
then,
I understand.
then you hit the
Sorry.
countryside line after that.
Right.
So expanding the countryside line is such a big deal, and why our organization advocates so strongly for keeping it where it is because if you move that countryside line, you're essentially opening up entire new neighborhoods of development where we need to be protecting natural areas and farmland and groundwater. So that there is actually a lot of growth, both from intensification and within the green areas that's within the countryside line. And it's somewhat easier for all of us to agree that we need to hold it where it is. What we've seen with options 1, 2, and 3 is that option 3 is providing an ambitious scenario where we actually don't expand into the designated green field at all, either. And what that does is it extends the life of our countryside line. At some point we will reach that line. I would love for it to be in 100 or 200 years rather than in 50 years.
Right. Okay, I just wanted clarification on that. So what you're proposing is that we don't extend the urban boundary into the DGA area.
Yes, and that would be achieved with option 3 or also the option 4 that community groups have put forward.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Chapman. Councillor Singh, you're up next.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor. I had some question to Councillor Chapman. I think Sam has answered that regarding his or their assessment of where growth needs to be. I'll just ask for a little bit more clarity. And Sam, I realize that you're saying that we should necessarily not be speeding up growth in the DG areas yet either. But again, we also have to be fair and balanced with ensuring that we have the right amount of supply towards housing, even low-rise housing as well, or detached housing. And some of that is being built in our townships, which do have very, I guess, crucial farmlands. Now, isn't that kind of contrary to what your organization would want? Seeing that type of development happening in the townships, as opposed to where we do have infrastructure, where we do have amenity space already. Like, what's your comment on that? And just as I ask you that, I am in full agreement with you that we do need to protect the countryside line. We need to be very clear and transparent with the comments regarding that where the countryside line is and the protection thereof. My only kind of concern is your further input in saying that we shouldn't necessarily even go into the DGA areas either, while at the same time the townships are asking for more growth and the region seems to be listening, which I think is even more harmful. So I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, thanks for your question, Councillor Singh. When we think about growth in the townships, one thing that comes to mind is late last year when we had the proposal between Baden and New Hamburg for a new development, and one of the reasons why that was being proposed in an undeveloped area was because it had been difficult for that municipality to achieve growth using infill in Baden and New Hamburg. However, yeah, Hold the Line would argue that centering growth where services already exist on a village settlement that is already there is the preferred solution. In that case, we were talking about an area that was within the countryside line, so they weren't going to breach the line. However, anytime you're using up that land, it requires a fulsome discussion of once we use this, we can't get it back, right? So it's not as much of a line in the sand, so to speak, as the countryside line would be, but it still requires a lot of discussion, and it still requires a really high bar to justify, why wasn't this municipality able to fit growth in in a more intensive way. And as demographics age, as people start looking for alternative living arrangements where they might not want to take care of such a large property, older residents in all of our municipalities are going to need these different forms of housing, different lifestyles, so that someone can actually age in place in their community, not have to move to a different city or move to a different neighborhood to make that work. So yeah, not sure if that answers your question fully,
Yeah,
but
I think it does a little bit. Just for with the remaining time for clarity, where would you rather see development happening in comparison? If it has to happen, and again, we do have to meet a need of a growing population, and again, we have certain growth targets to meet, and that's to say that we're actually exceeding those growth targets as well. Development, at the very least, happening in our designated greenfield areas that are within the countryside line, or the development happening in the townships. What do you think is more impeding towards meeting our environmental targets, meeting, ensuring that we have better protection of our farmland, and of course sensitive lands when it comes to water recharge areas as well? Where do you see more harmful in the townships or in a designated greenfield area?
So we have one countryside line around Kitchener, Waterloo, Cambridge. There are also other countryside lines, smaller ones around the rural settlement areas like Ayr, like Elmira, like New Hamburg and Baden. And so they are, I would treat them on an equal footing. If we get intensification in the heart of Baden or in the heart of New Hamburg, I'd say that's just as necessary as intensification in downtown Kitchener.
Thank you.
Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, Mayor Urbanovic, and thanks, Sam, for coming in. I guess one of the questions that I have, and a lot of the comments you make are valid. One of the things that we see at our level, dealing here on council, is the consistent voices against intensification. And it's particularly almost every single project that is brought forward to council, and more importantly, it's even in our smaller neighbor, like in suburbs, massive opposition towards semis or even townhomes. So how do you suggest that we navigate through that when we're looking at higher intensification levels?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for the question. And yeah, there are often controversial reactions to high rises, especially. One thing that I want to first highlight, which was also in the staff report, is that when we think about our growth scenarios, option 1, 2, and 3 all had the same number, same percentage of high rise development. So we do need it at some level. What I would say is, if we take a look at that website that I mentioned called visualizingdensity.ca, you start to look into these neighborhoods and portions of these neighborhoods, and that place in Oakville that I pointed out, that's at 220 people and jobs per hectare. You zoom out and the entire neighborhood is only 41, which is not transit supportive, which is not really where we want to be. And why is that? It's not only because they have lower density housing. It's also because the roads are very wide. It's also because they have a plaza with a massive parking lot. And so when we're approving subdivision plans, and when we're planning out neighborhoods and doing even at the secondary plan level at the City of Kitchener, there's an opportunity to think about density at those levels as well. Before we think about, we used up all this land for roads and for parking lots, now we have to squeeze as much as we can into this parcel of land. If you start by building those homes closer together, then you're already a step ahead. And then I would also just point to the great popularity of accessory dwelling units in Kitchener, and opening that up for people really showed us that, yeah, there is a lot of demand, and people are ready to to add a second dwelling unit and essentially double the density of their properties. So if we do these at a more incremental level, but also if we start the process by building denser communities to begin with, narrower roads also make for safer streets. And we can talk about a lot of that, those knock-on benefits to safety as well. Okay.
I mean, I think it's a little more difficult than what you're stating, but I don't disagree. I'm in favor of intensification. You did bring out a good point about transit-supported growth. So how's growing in the townships being supported by transit? Because to me, that doesn't make any sense. Any growth in the townships when there's really not a transit supported.
The townships have their own economies that need people and jobs to support that economy as well. And we have established our countryside lines around those areas. It's not all of the villages, it's not all of the settlements in the rural areas. The region has chosen which places have these countryside line boundaries around them. And I do think that there should be a proportional level of growth there in both people and jobs, so that somebody who is living in that community has a choice in where they live and work.
Okay. One quick question and another question quickly. Sam, are you a resident of Kitchener?
I am a resident of Kitchener.
Okay.
Yes.
How do you feel about paying taxes for Center in the Square, for the auditorium, for all the parks that we have in our community, whereas neighborhoods that are directly adjacent to Kitchener do not pay those taxes? How do you feel about that?
I'm not sure I understand the question. I mean, areas like the border between Kitchener and Waterloo is very porous, and I often go up to Waterloo to enjoy their parks, and people that I know who live near Kitchener.
So more particular, sorry, Sam, more particular, I'm referring to areas such as like Breslau that are basically adjacent to Kitchener, but do not pay taxes and reap the benefits of Kitchener's taxpayers with their facilities.
Councillor Ioannidis, I'm not, respectfully, I'm not sure what this has to do with the ROP.
It is just about growth in general, because the ROP is saying growth in the townships, where I'm trying to say that's not logical.
Okay, that's go ahead, Sam, and then Councillor Ioannidis will ask you to cue back in if you have further questions.
Sure.
Yeah. So to that, I would I don't know if I have a detailed answer for you on that one. However, when we're talking about growth, growth in the townships, it's a very small amount of growth compared to what Kitchener would be getting. And I do agree that Kitchener should be getting the lion's share of growth, as we are the center of this region with the most infrastructure and the most capacity to absorb that intensification. It's a matter of degrees. And if we take a look at the different options that have been presented, there's a conversation to be had about how much growth in each area is warranted. I think it also gets interesting when we talk about the employment growth, because there are certain areas that are more suited, particularly around Cambridge, for employment growth rather than Kitchener.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Davey. You had your hand up. Did you take it down? Sorry.
I did, but I think the question was answered. My question was going to be, I understand Sam's preference for not going into any new designated greenfield areas. My question was going to be, supposing that option is off the list, because obviously the region makes the decision, where would you prefer to see the growth? And I think I heard the answer was that the majority would be in Kitchener if he was forced down that road within the countryside line but still some in the township. So unless I'm incorrect in my understanding, Sam, thanks for showing up today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Michaud.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks, Sam, for coming out and sharing your comments with us. I just have a question with regards to the Southwest Kitchener policy area. The parcels of land out there, my understanding, were not included in the country within the countryside line because of the until there were 2 groundwater related tests that had to be cleared. When those tests are cleared, if those grounds are part of the countryside and within the countryside line, are you open to that, to have more development out there? Understanding that Kitchener, what you just said, Kitchener should get the lion's share of development.
So the countryside line will be drawn where it is drawn based on those groundwater studies. And we have been, Hold the Line has been in touch with regional staff over the last 2 or even maybe 3 years now, trying to understand when that detailed mapping will be available. It appears that it will be available this fall. So that's the mapping to know where the countryside line is. And that encapsulates any area that may be considered for future designated greenfield area. It doesn't mean that it has to be assigned as greenfield area right away. It doesn't mean that it has to be assigned as greenfield or urban area even to 2051 if we don't need it. So our approach is to be the most cautious and to take the precautionary principle here to say that, if all the lands that are allowed inside the countryside line, they can still be designated rural as they are currently being used. And then as growth is required to get closer and closer to that area, then there may be an opportunity in a future RUP review to designate them as DGA or to designate them as urban, but that doesn't have to happen this time.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. I don't see any other hands, so I'll ask my question. Sam, if I'm understanding and hearing you correctly, you're suggesting that the region's consultant is underestimating the amount of supply that's there already, correct?
I don't have the report in front of me, but I know looking forward for the projections, they're way off when it comes to accessory dwelling units, and they're way off when it comes to the proportion of single family residences that have been built in Kitchener. So when we think about, as in particular, growth option 1, that's a scenario that would actually see us building less density than we already are in the region. And that would mean, any new developments that have already been approved and are going to be built soon would actually just have to reduce the choice of housing form and only be building large single homes. And that's not that's not necessarily a solution that's going to make it a more equitable or more affordable or a more walkable society for us. Mayor DeBange, I think you're muted.
Thank you, and I appreciate that, and that certainly is an important consideration as we go forward. Have you had an opportunity to, because we've heard from some other delegations around work that their land economists have done, have you had an opportunity to consider any of that and how that relates to the work that the region has done?
Are you speaking about the land economists that have been raised representing landowners in the outlying areas?
Yeah.
I haven't been able to speak with them directly, but what I would just say to that is that there's been a bit of a conversation about the method that regional staff are using, this capacity model versus the alternative. And all that I would comment on that is that from our perspective at Hold the Line, regional staff have been working closely with the province, and I'm sure that they wouldn't be going down this road on a process working closely with their provincial counterparts if it was such a such a flawed methodology. You know, I don't have a problem per se with the capacity-based analysis. And I do think when we look at things like our ability to regulate bedrooms and number of bedrooms, that's going to give us the tools to create the diversity of options that we want in our communities as we grow. If we had stuck with the land economists' projections from the last ROP review that were challenged, you know, we would have, like, we already surpassed the middle of the road projections that were said, but I just don't see that the opinions of land economists that say people are going to keep living the way they have for the last 40 years is the right way to look forward for the next 50 years.
Right. Okay, thank you. That appears to be all of the questions we have. So just want to thank you for taking the time to come in today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and I appreciate the opportunity.
No problem. So Mr. Chapman, I'll now go to you and see if you've been able to learn anything from the region from a timing perspective. And I'm just cognizant that we've got 20 minutes at best before finance is supposed to start. Not finance, community services, apologies. And a long agenda there. So Mr. Chapman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I've been able to confirm with regional staff that if you defer the discussion to the 13th, they will be able to provide the Kitchener resolution or position to regional council as supplementary information with the published staff report. So regional council will have your perspective as they consider the report on the 22nd. And certainly I think there is a path here for council to certainly deal with principles on the 13th in advance of the region's report, at which time they would identify a preferred alternative. And then if it's your wish, we'll come back on the 20th. And at that point, you could actually deal with the full range of options and consider supporting a specific position if that was your wish. As you know, on the 22nd, they're only endorsing a preliminary preferred alternative, and there will be a separate regional council discussion in August, at which point they would deal with any amendments and finalize their decision. And so it seems to me, Mr. Mayor, that it would be reasonable if you wish to defer the item to the 13th and deal with it then.
Okay. Thank you. So I turn it to my colleagues. You know, in light of where we're at in the day, my suggestion would be that that's what we look at doing. But Councillor Singh, I see your hand is up.
Yep, I put forward that motion, the deferral to the 13th.
Okay, is there a seconder? Councillor Michaud. So the intent would be, just so that everyone is clear, that we would look at doing this at 10 o'clock on Monday the 13th. So there's a hydro meeting prior to that, and I know there will be an opportunity to come in virtually for that, and then we would sort of proceed from there. Okay, I've got several people. Councillor Chapman, on the timing.
Pardon me?
On the timing?
Yes. Yeah, in my recommendation, I'm one of the clauses asked the region the region to delay the process. What would that do to that part of my motion?
So if we dealt with that on the 13th, that would, that would still flow to the region, and regional staff could consider that, and ultimately regional council would have that information to consider it on the 22nd.
Okay, as long as it's not going to get lost, because it's not about us delaying, it's about them delaying, right?
Yep. I mean, I suspect I know what regional staff will say on it, but notwithstanding, we would certainly be in a position to express that as a viewpoint. And And then it would be up to ultimately regional council to decide that.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Marsh on timing. Oh, you're muted, Councillor Marsh. Hold on, let me use my.
There we go. I got it. Yeah. Oh, you have that waiting. Good for you. An hour is not going to do it, right? It's just not going to do it. And so what's the game plan for when we don't finish is my question. And my suggestion, if we don't have a good answer for that, because Monday is going to be one heck of a long day, given the agenda items, I'm thinking that we should add another. We should look at the possibility of adding a time slot that would be closer to 2 to 3 hours on this topic in the next couple of days.
Well, that is probably a little bit of a challenge, but we can certainly take it away and take a look at that. Councillor Schneider.
Yeah, just for me personally, I have had another meeting slated at that time with the Student Safety Council with Chicopee Hill School. So that's the only time that meeting can happen. So makes it very difficult for me.
Okay, can I suggest, Councillor Singh, if you're making the motion, you maybe move that staff work with us to find a time to do this and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, agreed. I think staff can work with us. Thanks.
Okay, Councillor Michaud.
Just a question. Can we start at like 7 in the morning? Is anybody open to that? And then we could get all our hours in.
I'm cognizant.
I'm an early riser, but
yeah, but I mean, in fairness, Councillor Michaud, I'm cognizant that the vast majority of council have families and young children, and staff do as well. So I don't think that's a reasonable option.
Okay.
So we're deferring, and we will come back with an option that will get us to this before the 15th. Is the motion. So with that, all those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. So motion to adjourn right now.
Sorry, Barry, just clarification. In that motion, did we rule out the 13th as an option even, or?
We did not rule out the 13th as an option.
Okay, so it could come back to be 9:30 in the morning, for example, or something. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, we're going to try to factor in, because the goal is to obviously have everyone from council engaged. Okay, so with that, all those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. We will, I guess, have a 15-minute break.
Through you, Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
My apologies. If you wouldn't mind doing the bylaws just before we adjourn.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't think we needed one because we didn't really decide anything. So motion for the 3 readings of the bylaws. Before Councillor Singh, Councillor Galloway Seelock, all those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And now we'll do all the other motions that we did afterwards, but we won't do them again. Go and enjoy your break. We'll see you in 13 minutes.
Just a reminder to members of council, there is another link for community and infrastructure services.